You've been told that if nothing is changing fast, then nothing is changing at all, that if your life feels slow, you must be falling behind, that if results don't appear, you must be doing something wrong. But if that were true, why do so many people rush and still feel empty? Why does speed bring exhaustion instead of peace? Why does forcing the next step only create more resistance? The truth is this: what moves slowly is still moving forward. Growth does not need noise, progress does not need proof, and trust does not need certainty. Buddhist teachings remind us that the path unfolds in its own time, that roots grow in darkness, that clarity comes after patience, not before it. Tonight, as you listen, your need to hurry will begin to loosen your mind. Will stop chasing the next moment. Your body will remember how to rest inside the present one. You will understand that even if you feel unsure, even if nothing looks different, even if the path feels quiet, you are still moving forward. This is not about pushing. This is about trusting the step, trusting the pace, trusting yourself. What moves slowly is still moving forward. Are you ready? Let's begin. The words you just heard are not meant to motivate you to move faster. They are meant to loosen the grip of urgency that has been quietly tightening around your life. There is a moment after understanding, but before action, where something settles inside you. This is that moment. This is where the noise fades and a deeper question begins to surface. What if stillness is not failure? What if pause is not weakness? What if the very thing you have been judging is the evidence that something important is happening beneath the surface? There is a quiet discomfort that comes when nothing seems to move. Not the loud pain of loss or the sharp shock of change, but a dull, persistent pressure. The kind that makes you question yourself late at night. The kind that whispers that you should be further along by now. That pressure is not accidental. It comes from a world that worships speed and mistakes motion for meaning. When movement slows, fear rushes in to fill the space. Fear tells you that stillness means you are stuck. But this fear does not understand how growth truly works. Remaining still is often harder than moving forward or backward. Forward motion carries hope. Backward motion carries familiarity. Stillness carries uncertainty. When you stay where you are without clear results, without applause, without reassurance, your mind has nothing to cling to. It cannot distract itself with progress or comfort itself with nostalgia. It is exposed, and that exposure is what makes stillness feel unbearable. Yet this is precisely why it holds so much power. In Buddhist understanding, effort is not measured by visible change. It is measured by intention and direction. If you are not moving backward, you are already doing something rare. Regression is easy. Old habits wait patiently. Old patterns do not need effort to return. They pull you like gravity. Resisting them requires energy, awareness, and restraint. That resistance may look like nothing from the outside, but internally it is active, alive, and demanding. Holding your ground when it would be easier to collapse is a form of motion that most people never learn to respect. Inertia is usually described as laziness or lack of motivation, but spiritually, inertia often appears at moments of deep transition, when an old identity no longer fits but a new one has not yet formed. Movement slows. You cannot rush this space because you do not yet know who you are becoming. Forcing action here often leads to choices rooted in fear rather than truth. Stillness becomes a kind of protection. It keeps you from building your future on unstable ground. There is also a hidden discipline in not reacting. When something inside you wants to escape discomfort by making any move at all, choosing to stay is an act of strength. It trains the mind to tolerate uncertainty without panic. It teaches the nervous system that not everything unresolved is dangerous. Over time, this creates inner stability. A person who can remain steady without constant progress becomes very hard to shake. Many people believe that growth must feel inspiring or productive, but real growth often feels dull, slow, and even pointless while it is happening. Seeds do not announce themselves while they are underground. They do not rush, they do not compare themselves to other seeds. They respond only to conditions. When conditions are not right, they wait. This waiting is not passive. Inside the seed, complex processes are unfolding, but nothing is visible yet. Resisting regression is one of the most misunderstood forms of progress. Not returning to what harmed you before may not feel like success, but it is. Not repeating the same mistake again may not feel like achievement, but it is. Every time you choose not to act from old fear, old anger, or old self-doubt, you are redirecting the course of your life. Even if nothing new has appeared yet, something destructive has been prevented. That matters more than you think. The mind struggles with this because it prefers clear markers. It wants milestones, confirmation, and speed. Silence feels like failure to the mind because silence gives no feedback. But silence is often where the most important recalibration happens. When external input slows, internal awareness sharpens. You begin to notice subtle reactions. You see patterns you were too busy to see before. You catch impulses before they turn into actions. This awareness is not flashy, but it is foundational. There is also a deep humility that comes with slow movement. Speed often inflates the ego. It creates the illusion of control. Slowness strips that away. It reminds you that not everything bends to your will. This humility is not meant to weaken you. It is meant to align you with reality. When you stop fighting the pace of your life, you begin to work with it instead. And that cooperation creates a kind of quiet momentum that does not burn you out. Stillness also exposes the stories you tell yourself. When there is no progress to point to, the mind fills the gap with judgment. You may notice harsh inner voices becoming louder. This is not a sign that stillness is wrong. It is a sign that you are finally hearing what was always there. These stories lose power only when they are seen clearly. Movement often keeps them hidden. Stillness brings them to the surface so they can be understood and released. There is an important distinction between stagnation and conscious pause. Stagnation comes from avoidance. Pause comes from awareness. Stagnation numbs. Pause listens. When you remain still because you are afraid to act, energy contracts. When you remain still because you are learning, energy gathers. From the outside, these states look identical. Internally, they feel very different. One drains you, the other quietly prepares you. Many spiritual traditions recognize that life moves in cycles. Expansion is followed by contraction. Action is followed by rest. Ignoring this rhythm creates imbalance. When you try to expand endlessly, you exhaust yourself. When you allow contraction without shame, you recover wisdom. Stillness is not the end of movement. It is the reset that makes meaningful movement possible. Trust is not built during moments of success. It is built during moments when you keep going without evidence. When you do not abandon yourself just because results are delayed. Each time you stay present instead of running, trust deepens. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in your ability to remain steady, regardless of outcomes. This kind of trust cannot be taught quickly. It is earned through repetition in quiet moments no one sees. There is also courage in not performing. In a world that rewards visibility, choosing not to display your progress takes strength. You learn to separate your worth from external validation. You begin to act from inner alignment rather than approval. This shift changes everything. It makes your growth less fragile. When progress is not dependent on recognition, it becomes sustainable. Remaining still can feel like standing against a strong current. Everything around you urges you to rush, compare, and prove. Choosing slowness is a form of resistance. Not rebellion fueled by anger, but resistance rooted in wisdom. You stop allowing fear to dictate your pace. You move when movement is true, not when pressure demands it. Over time, something subtle happens. The anxiety tied to progress loosens. You stop measuring your life in visible achievements alone. You begin to notice internal shifts, how you respond differently than before, how certain triggers no longer pull you as strongly, how you can sit with discomfort longer without needing to escape. These changes are easy to dismiss, but they are signs of real transformation. When momentum finally returns, it feels different. It is calmer, less desperate, more precise. You are no longer moving to prove something. You are moving because the next step is clear. This clarity often comes quietly, without drama. It arises not from effort, but from readiness. And readiness cannot be rushed. What appears to be inertia is often integration, lessons settling, identity reorganizing, values aligning. When you respect this process instead of fighting it, you save yourself years of unnecessary struggle. You stop trying to outrun your own becoming. Remaining still does not mean you are doing nothing. It means you are doing something invisible, something essential, something that does not announce itself until it is complete. And when it is, the movement that follows carries a strength that speed alone could never create. This is how forward momentum can exist without visible motion. This is how not falling back becomes a victory. This is how trust begins to replace urgency. And this is how what moves slowly continues, quietly, undeniably forward. What follows grows naturally from that quiet strength you just touched. When movement becomes subtle and patience replaces urgency, something else begins to happen beneath the surface. Effort no longer seeks applause, growth no longer needs proof, and a different kind of progress starts to take shape, one that unfolds far from noise, far from eyes, far from praise. This is where things become real. There is a strange loneliness that comes when you keep going and no one notices, no encouragement, no recognition, no visible reward, just you, repeating the same small effort day after day. At first, this loneliness can feel discouraging. The mind begins to ask why you bother. What is the point of effort that leaves no trace? But hidden inside this quiet space is a powerful transformation that rarely happens any other way. When no one is watching, intention changes. Actions lose their performance layer. You stop doing things to be seen and start doing them because they feel right. This shift is subtle, but it rewires motivation at its root. Effort driven by approval is fragile. It collapses when validation disappears. Effort driven by inner alignment becomes stable. It does not depend on feedback to survive. Unseen effort strips away self-deception. When there is no audience, there is no benefit in pretending. You see clearly how much energy you are truly willing to give. You notice when you cut corners. You notice when resistance appears. This honesty is uncomfortable at first, but it is cleansing. It clears intention of false layers and leaves behind something simpler and stronger. There is also a quiet discipline that forms in private effort. Doing the right thing when no one will know trains integrity at a deep level. Over time, your actions begin to match your values more consistently. You stop negotiating with yourself as much. You stop needing external pressure to behave with care. This alignment builds trust within you, not confidence based on results, but trust based on character. Many people struggle not because they lack ability, but because their effort depends on being witnessed. When praise disappears, motivation collapses. But when you learn to continue without witnesses, you free yourself from this dependency. You become less reactive to attention and less wounded by neglect. This emotional independence creates resilience that cannot be taken away. There is something else happening during unseen progress. The nervous system relaxes. When you are not trying to impress, there is less tension, less self-monitoring, less fear of failure. This relaxed state allows deeper learning. Mistakes become information instead of threats. Curiosity replaces pressure. Growth becomes more natural. Unseen effort also protects sincerity. When goals are shared too early, they often become distorted by expectation. You start shaping your path to match how others see it. Quiet effort shields your process from this interference. It allows intentions to mature before they are exposed. This protection keeps growth grounded and less vulnerable to ego. In Buddhist teachings, purification does not come from dramatic acts. It comes from repeated right action done without attachment to outcome. When effort is unseen, attachment loosens. You act because it is wholesome, not because it will be rewarded. This creates clarity of mind. Actions stop carrying hidden demands. They become lighter. Over time, something unexpected happens. You begin to trust yourself more, not because you succeeded publicly, but because you showed up privately. You know what you are capable of even when no one is watching. This self-trust is quiet but unshakable. It does not need reassurance. It does not crumble under doubt. There is a deep peace that comes from knowing you are living in alignment, even if no one knows it. This peace does not depend on circumstances. It comes from coherence between inner values and outer behavior. When those two match, the mind settles. Inner conflict reduces. Energy stops leaking through contradiction. Unseen effort also teaches patience in a new way. When progress is invisible, you cannot rush toward a finish line. You learn to focus on the process itself. Attention shifts from outcome to presence. This presence sharpens awareness. You notice subtleties you would miss if you were chasing results. Life slows down just enough for depth to appear. There is also humility in working without witnesses. You stop assuming that effort entitles you to recognition. You accept that much of life unfolds quietly. This humility softens the ego. It makes learning easier. It allows correction without shame. When pride loosens, wisdom has more room to enter. Another transformation happens in how you relate to time. Without external markers of success, time stops being measured by achievement alone. Days are no longer wasted just because nothing visible happened. You begin to sense value in consistency, in showing up, in not abandoning the path. This changes how you experience your life. Unseen progress also changes how you relate to others. When you are no longer chasing recognition, comparison loses power. You are less threatened by other people's success, less envious, less defensive. You can appreciate others without feeling diminished. This emotional maturity creates healthier relationships. There is a quiet courage required to continue when doubt has no immediate answer. No applause means doubt speaks louder. Questions become sharper. This is where inner trust is forged. Each time you continue anyway, trust strengthens. Not blind trust, but earned trust. Trust that you can stay with uncertainty without falling apart. Over time, you may notice that motivation shifts from excitement to commitment. Excitement rises and falls. Commitment remains. This is not dull, it is stable. It allows long-term growth. Many meaningful changes in life require this kind of steady presence. Without it, progress fragments. Unseen effort also deepens compassion. When you struggle quietly, you become more understanding of others who do the same. You stop assuming that lack of visible success means lack of effort. This softens judgment. It expands empathy. You recognize that everyone carries invisible labor. There is also a subtle joy in private consistency, not the loud joy of celebration, but a calm satisfaction, a sense of rightness. You may not feel accomplished, but you feel grounded. This groundedness becomes a refuge. It steadies you during chaos. It anchors you when things fall apart. When results eventually appear, they feel different, less intoxicating, less defining. You are not dependent on them for identity. Success becomes something you experience, not something you cling to. And if results never appear in the way you expected, you are still intact. Your worth was never tied to visibility. Unseen effort teaches you to value what lasts. Attention fades, trends change, praise disappears, but inner alignment remains. The habits you build in silence shape your future more than any public milestone. This understanding brings relief. You no longer feel pressured to perform your becoming. As this way of moving settles in, trust becomes quieter but stronger. You trust the path without needing constant confirmation. You trust yourself without needing proof. This trust does not eliminate doubt. It holds doubt without being ruled by it. That is its strength. This kind of progress cannot be rushed or displayed. It matures slowly, deepening roots before growing branches. It prepares you for responsibility without inflating ego. It gives you stability before expansion. When life eventually asks more of you, you will not be scrambling to become ready. You already are. What grows without witnesses grows with integrity. What is built in silence stands longer. And what is practiced when no one is watching becomes who you are when everything is. What grows in silence prepares you for something few people talk about. After patience, after unseen effort, there comes a moment that feels heavier than all the rest. A moment when nothing feels worth continuing, not dramatic, not loud, just tired, just thin. This is the place where many paths quietly end. Not because they were wrong, but because staying became harder than leaving. There is a point on every meaningful path where effort stops feeling noble and starts feeling foolish. The mind no longer asks for encouragement, it asks for relief. This is the moment just before abandonment. Not the moment of quitting itself, but the moment when quitting feels reasonable, logical, even kind. Buddhism pays close attention to this moment because it is not a failure point, it is a threshold. Almost giving up is not weakness, it is a sign that something deep is being touched. When surface motivation burns out, what remains is truth. You find out why you were walking this path in the first place. If your reason was ego, praise, or reward, the path ends here. If your reason was alignment, meaning, or inner clarity, the path changes shape but continues. In Buddhist teaching, staying does not mean forcing yourself to endure suffering blindly. It means not abandoning awareness. When the urge to quit arises, it is not pushed away or obeyed immediately. It is observed. That observation alone creates space. In that space, you are no longer just reacting. You are practicing wisdom. The mind is skilled at disguising fear as logic. At the edge of endurance, it produces convincing arguments. It says, "This is pointless." It says, "Nothing will change." It says, "You have already given enough." These thoughts feel calm and reasonable because they are tired thoughts. Buddhism does not argue with them. It watches them, and in watching, their authority weakens. There is something sacred about staying when hope is low. Not dramatic hope, but the simple willingness to remain present. This kind of staying strips effort down to its essence. You are no longer chasing improvement. You are simply refusing to turn away. That refusal is not stubbornness. It is devotion to awareness itself. Many people believe transformation comes from breakthroughs. Buddhism points to something quieter. Transformation often happens in the moment you decide not to escape discomfort. When you stay with confusion without demanding clarity. When you stay with effort without demanding results. This staying reshapes the mind more deeply than success ever could. Success reinforces identity. Staying dissolves it. When you succeed, the self grows stronger. When you stay through difficulty without reward, the self loosens. This loosening is essential for wisdom. A rigid self cannot see clearly. A softened self can. The moment before giving up is also the moment when attachment becomes visible. Attachment to outcome, attachment to progress, attachment to being someone who is improving. When these attachments are threatened, suffering spikes. Buddhism teaches that suffering does not mean you are on the wrong path. It often means you are seeing attachment clearly for the first time. Staying does not guarantee external change. That is not its promise. Its promise is internal freedom. When you stay without guarantees, you learn that you can survive uncertainty. That realization changes your relationship with fear. Fear loses its power to command immediate action. There is also compassion hidden in staying. When you experience the urge to abandon something you once cared about, you understand others more deeply. You stop judging people for quitting. You see how heavy it can feel. This compassion softens your view of the world. It makes you less rigid, less harsh, more human. Buddhism speaks often of the middle way. Almost giving up is where extremes reveal themselves. Force says, push harder no matter what. Escape says, leave now to end discomfort. Staying without force or escape is the middle. It requires sensitivity, listening, adjusting without abandoning. This kind of staying is not passive, it is attentive. You may change how you practice, you may rest, you may simplify, but you do not sever your relationship with the path itself. You remain in conversation with it. This ongoing relationship is what allows growth to continue even when form changes. There is a subtle confidence that forms when you stay through difficulty. Not confidence in outcome, but confidence in your capacity to remain present. This confidence does not announce itself. It shows up later, when life presents another challenge, and you do not panic as quickly. You recognize the territory. You have been here before. Almost giving up also reveals impermanence in a personal way. Motivation rises and falls. Desire fluctuates, certainty dissolves. Seeing this directly weakens the belief that you must feel inspired to continue. You learn that commitment can exist without enthusiasm. This is a mature form of practice. Buddhist monks are taught that when the urge to leave arises, they should stay a little longer, not forever, just long enough to understand the urge. Often, what they find is not a true calling to leave, but exhaustion, loneliness, or doubt. These states pass. Decisions made from them often do not age well. Staying through this moment teaches discernment. You learn the difference between wisdom and avoidance. Sometimes leaving is right. But leaving from clarity feels different than leaving from fatigue. Staying long enough allows that difference to become clear. There is also humility in staying. You stop assuming you know how things should unfold. You accept that growth does not follow your preferred timeline. This humility opens you to learning that success would have closed off. When you are no longer trying to win, you can listen. The Dharma does not promise comfort. It promises clarity. The moment before giving up is where clarity can deepen most. When illusions fall away, when narratives collapse, when only presence remains. This presence is not exciting, it is honest. And honesty is transformative. Many people reach this point and assume something has gone wrong. Buddhism suggests the opposite. This may be the moment when practice becomes real. Before this, effort was fueled by hope. After this, it is fueled by understanding. Staying also changes your relationship with failure. You realize that quitting is not the only failure. Abandoning awareness is. As long as awareness remains, the path continues, regardless of form. This realization removes much of the fear around getting things wrong. Over time, staying builds quiet resilience. Not the loud kind that boasts endurance, but the steady kind that does not break easily. This resilience is flexible. It bends without collapsing. It allows you to adapt without losing yourself. There is a deep dignity in staying, not because it looks strong, but because it is honest. You are not pretending to be inspired. You are not chasing a future version of yourself. You are meeting reality as it is and choosing not to turn away. When people speak of transformation, they often point to moments of victory. Buddhism points to moments of endurance with awareness. Staying when you almost give up reshapes the mind in ways success cannot. Success confirms who you think you are. Staying reveals who you actually are beneath effort. Eventually, the intensity of almost giving up passes. not always quickly, but it passes. What remains is a deeper trust. Not trust that things will work out, but trust that you can remain present even if they do not. This trust is freedom. From this place, the path continues, not because you forced yourself, but because something inside you clarified. You stayed long enough for illusion to burn out. You stayed long enough for truth to surface quietly. And that quiet truth carries you forward, not with excitement, but with depth. What happens after you choose to stay is not what most people expect. There is no sudden reward, no clear sign that tells you that you made the right choice. Instead, life often slows down even more. The path becomes quieter, progress becomes harder to explain, and this is where a new misunderstanding appears. The mind starts to believe that slowness means delay. Buddhism offers a different view. It teaches that slow growth is not an obstacle to wisdom. It is the way wisdom is protected. When something grows too fast, it becomes fragile. It has not learned how to hold its own weight. In human development, this fragility shows up as ego. When insight, success, or clarity arrives before humility has formed, pride fills the gap. The person begins to identify with the growth instead of being shaped by it. Slow growth prevents this by stretching development across time, forcing the mind to mature alongside understanding. Gradual unfolding keeps wisdom from becoming a performance. When change happens slowly, there is no dramatic moment to cling to, no story to tell, no identity to build around being advanced. This protects you from spiritual pride, which is one of the most subtle traps on any inner path. Pride does not always look loud. Sometimes it hides behind certainty, behind advice-giving, behind the quiet belief that you now see more clearly than others. Slow growth also keeps understanding embodied. Fast insight often stays intellectual. It sounds right, but it has not yet been tested by life. When growth is gradual, each small realization must live with you through ordinary days, through irritation, through boredom, through disappointment. This daily friction grounds wisdom. It stops it from floating above reality. There is also a protective patience built through slowness. You learn to hold insight without rushing to act on it. You learn to let understanding settle before it speaks. This restraint is not hesitation, it is discernment. Many mistakes are made not because insight is wrong, but because it is expressed before it is ready. Buddhist teachings emphasize right timing as much as right understanding. A truth revealed too early can cause harm, to yourself or to others. Slow growth ensures that wisdom ripens at the same pace as compassion. Without compassion, insight becomes sharp and cutting. With compassion, it becomes healing. Another protection offered by slowness is the reduction of attachment to identity. When growth takes time, you cannot easily point to a moment where you became someone new. The self remains fluid. This fluidity keeps ego from solidifying around progress. You are less likely to think, "I have arrived," because arrival never clearly happens. Slow growth also limits exposure. When understanding unfolds quietly, fewer people project expectations onto you. You are not pressured to represent wisdom before you are ready. This privacy allows mistakes. It allows learning without shame. Premature exposure often freezes development because the fear of being seen as inconsistent becomes stronger than the desire to keep learning. There is a reason many traditions value apprenticeship. Wisdom passed slowly through observation and repetition protects both teacher and student. It ensures that knowledge is carried responsibly. In personal growth, slow unfolding plays the same role. It prevents you from carrying insights you do not yet know how to live. Gradual growth also builds humility through repetition. When progress is slow, you are reminded often of your limits. You encounter the same struggles again and again. This repetition humbles the mind. It keeps you from believing that one insight has solved everything. You learn that understanding deepens through return, not conquest. Slowness also gives space for integration. Insight changes how you see the world. Integration changes how you live in it. These two processes move at different speeds. Insight can arrive quickly. Integration cannot. Slow growth honors this difference. It allows behavior, emotion, and perception to realign naturally. There is also protection from burnout. Rapid change demands constant adjustment. The nervous system struggles to keep up. Slow growth allows rest between shifts. It gives the body time to adapt. This steadiness preserves energy. It makes long-term practice possible. Another subtle protection is the weakening of comparison. When growth is slow and personal, there is little to compare. You stop measuring yourself against others' timelines. You begin to trust your own rhythm. This trust reduces envy and insecurity. It allows focus to return inward. Slow growth also reveals motivation clearly. When progress is delayed, false reasons fall away. If you are growing for recognition, impatience will expose it. If you are growing for escape, frustration will reveal it. What remains is a simpler intention, one that can endure. There is also a deep safety in being underestimated. When growth is quiet, you are not burdened by expectations. You are free to experiment, to fail, to change your mind. This freedom is rare and precious. It allows authenticity to survive. Buddhism does not see wisdom as something to display. It sees it as something to live. Slow growth aligns with this view. It ensures that understanding becomes behavior, not belief. That clarity becomes kindness, not certainty. Gradual unfolding also builds patience with others. When your own growth takes time, you stop expecting quick change from those around you. This patience improves relationships. It softens judgment. It creates space for connection rather than correction. There is also a protection from spiritual bypassing. Fast growth can skip over unresolved pain. Slow growth does not allow this. It brings unresolved patterns back again and again until they are met. This meeting is uncomfortable, but it prevents false peace. Slow growth teaches respect for complexity. You stop looking for simple answers. You accept that understanding deepens through layers. This respect keeps you curious. It prevents rigidity. It allows learning to continue. Over time, slow growth creates a kind of quiet confidence, not confidence that you are right, but confidence that you are learning. This confidence does not need defense. It does not argue. It listens. When wisdom is protected by slowness, it matures without distortion. It remains flexible, responsive, human. It does not harden into doctrine or identity. It stays alive. From the outside, slow growth may look like delay. From the inside, it feels like preparation, a careful shaping, a steady strengthening. It keeps you from becoming something you cannot yet carry. And when the time comes for clarity to express itself, it does so gently, without urgency, without pride, without the need to be seen. What unfolds then is not rushed growth, but rooted presence, not a sudden leap, but a natural step forward, taken at exactly the pace that keeps wisdom whole. What grows slowly begins to feel protected, but protection often comes with restriction. After wisdom has been sheltered from pride and hurry, life tends to do something that feels unsettling. Options reduce, energy funnels. The wide road quietly closes, and what remains feels narrow, specific, and demanding. This narrowing is rarely explained. It simply happens, and many people mistake it for loss, when in truth it is preparation for clarity. There are seasons when life feels open, many choices, many directions, many identities you could step into. This openness feels freeing, but it is also distracting. Awareness scatters, attention splits. When everything is possible, very little is seen deeply. Buddhism teaches that clarity does not come from endless options. It comes from refinement, and refinement requires narrowing. When the path narrows, distractions fall away. Not because you rejected them, but because they no longer fit. Activities that once held interest begin to feel empty. Conversations lose their pull. Certain ambitions quietly dissolve. This can feel confusing or even frightening. But this is awareness becoming more precise. Energy is being gathered instead of spread thin. Narrowing often appears as limitation. Less time, less energy, less tolerance for noise. The mind may panic and interpret this as decline. But spiritually, this contraction is intentional, like a lens focusing light. Narrowing concentrates attention. What once felt overwhelming becomes clearer because less is competing for awareness. Life often slows before clarity because speed depends on momentum and clarity depends on presence. When momentum fades, presence becomes unavoidable. You are forced to see what remains when movement stops. This seeing is not comfortable. It removes distractions that once softened discomfort, but it also removes illusions. When the path narrows, you are asked to choose depth over breadth, to stay with one question instead of many, to listen longer, to respond slower. This deepening sharpens perception. You begin to notice subtle patterns, small reactions, quiet truths that were always there but never held long enough. Buddhist practice values simplicity not as an aesthetic, but as a function of awareness. Too much input dulls perception. Narrowing reduces input. It creates space for discernment. You stop reacting to everything and start responding to what matters. This narrowing also refines values. When options disappear, priorities reveal themselves. You see what you are unwilling to let go of. You notice what remains meaningful even when convenience is gone. This is not something you decide intellectually, it is something life shows you through absence. Many people resist this phase because it feels like being cornered. The mind prefers escape routes, but narrowing removes escape. It invites intimacy with experience. You can no longer skim the surface. You are brought closer to what is essential. Clarity often arrives not as a new insight, but as the removal of confusion. Narrowing does this quietly. By taking away what is unnecessary, it allows what is true to stand out. This process feels subtractive, not additive. And subtraction can feel like loss until you see what it reveals. There is also a sharpening of responsibility that comes with narrowing. When choices are fewer, avoidance becomes harder. You can no longer blame confusion on complexity. You are asked to meet what is in front of you fully. This responsibility matures awareness. Narrowing also strengthens commitment. When the path is wide, commitment is loose. You can always turn elsewhere. When the path narrows, commitment deepens because turning away costs more. This cost is not punishment, it is clarification of intent. Life often narrows the path before clarity because clarity demands honesty. Honesty cannot coexist with endless distraction. When distractions fall away, self-deception becomes visible. You see what you have been avoiding. This seeing is uncomfortable, but it is cleansing. In Buddhism, renunciation is often misunderstood as rejection. In truth, it is refinement of attention. Narrowing is a form of renunciation that happens naturally. You stop engaging with what drains you because awareness no longer tolerates it. This is not force, it is sensitivity. Narrowing also deepens compassion. When your own life simplifies, you become more attuned to suffering. You notice pain you once overlooked. This sensitivity arises because awareness is no longer overloaded. Compassion sharpens alongside clarity. The slowing that accompanies narrowing is essential. Speed would blur perception. Slowness allows details to surface. You notice tone, intention, subtle emotional shifts. This refined awareness makes your responses more skillful. Narrowing also teaches trust. When familiar supports disappear, you learn to rely on presence itself. You discover that awareness can hold you even when circumstances feel constrained. This trust is quiet but strong. Many people interpret narrowing as life closing in on them. Buddhism suggests it is life guiding attention inward. The outer world becomes simpler so the inner world can be seen clearly. This inward turn is not withdrawal, it is alignment. Clarity that emerges from narrowing is different from clarity achieved through analysis. It is embodied, felt. You do not argue for it, you recognize it. It carries a sense of inevitability, not urgency, but rightness. Narrowing also reveals what you are ready for. Certain opportunities disappear because they no longer match your depth. This can feel disappointing, but it is protective. It prevents you from dispersing energy needed for what is next. As awareness refines, choices become simpler. Not because life is simpler, but because you see more clearly. You know what to say no to. You know what deserves care. This simplicity reduces inner conflict. The path narrows on purpose to teach you how to walk it fully. Wide paths encourage wandering. Narrow paths require presence. Each step matters. Each movement is felt. This attention transforms walking into practice. Eventually, clarity emerges not as certainty, but as steadiness. You stop needing many answers. One direction becomes enough. Not because it promises success, but because it feels true. This clarity does not shout, it settles. It brings a quiet confidence. You are no longer pulled in many directions. Awareness stands firm. Narrowing is not permanent, it is a phase. But the clarity it brings remains. Once awareness has been refined, even when life widens again, you do not lose what you learned. You carry discernment with you. What felt like restriction reveals itself as guidance. What felt like slowing reveals itself as focusing. And what felt like loss reveals itself as preparation. When the path narrows, life is not taking something away to punish you. It is removing what you no longer need so that what truly matters can finally be seen. When the path narrows long enough, something quiet becomes unavoidable. You cannot wait forever for clarity to arrive fully formed. The road no longer offers many options, yet it also does not offer certainty. What remains is a simple and uncomfortable choice. Stay frozen until reassurance appears, or take a step without knowing where it will land. This is where practice changes its nature. This is where trust stops being an idea and becomes an action. There is a deep habit in the human mind that looks for guarantees before it moves. Proof, signs, validation, something external that says yes, now is safe. When life was wide, you could delay movement and still feel alive. But on a narrow path, stillness without awareness turns into stagnation. At this stage, movement is required, but certainty is no longer available. This tension is not a mistake. It is the training itself. Buddhist teachings do not promise certainty. They teach how to live without it. The mind believes certainty creates safety, but experience shows otherwise. Even the most guaranteed outcomes change. Even the clearest plans collapse. Waiting for reassurance often means waiting forever. The practice then is learning how to move while uncertainty remains. Moving without certainty does not mean acting recklessly. It means acting without emotional insurance. You step not because you are sure it will work, but because staying still no longer feels honest. This honesty becomes your compass. It replaces prediction with presence. At first, this feels frightening. The mind protests. It says you are risking too much. It says you should wait a little longer. But waiting here is not neutral. Waiting carries its own cost. Energy begins to dull. Awareness weakens. Doubt grows louder. Buddhism recognizes that clinging to certainty can become another form of attachment. Trusting the step itself means shifting attention from outcome to intention. You stop asking where this will lead and start asking whether this step is aligned. Alignment becomes more important than success. This changes how decisions are made. You act from clarity in the present, not from fantasy about the future. This kind of movement is slow by necessity. Each step is felt. You cannot rush because there is no script to follow. This slowness sharpens awareness. You notice hesitation. You notice impulse. You notice fear trying to disguise itself as logic. Each step becomes a moment of practice. Moving without certainty also humbles the ego. The ego likes to know. It likes to appear confident. Acting without guarantees exposes vulnerability. You may have to admit you do not know what you are doing. This admission is not weakness. It is honesty, and honesty keeps learning alive. There is also a quiet courage required here, not the dramatic courage of bold declarations, but the steady courage of continuing without applause or confirmation. You may not feel brave, you may feel unsure. Courage here is not a feeling. It is a choice to proceed gently despite uncertainty. Buddhism teaches that clinging to outcomes creates suffering. Moving without certainty loosens this clinging. You act, but you release the demand that things unfold a certain way. This release does not make you passive. It makes you flexible. You adjust without collapsing. There is a subtle freedom in this practice. When you stop needing reassurance, fewer things can control you. Fear loses leverage. External opinion loses power. You are no longer waiting for permission to live in alignment. This independence is not isolation, it is inner stability. Moving without certainty also deepens presence. When you cannot rely on future outcomes, attention returns to the step itself, how it feels, what it requires. Presence becomes practical, not philosophical. You are here because here is all you can work with. This practice also reveals how often the mind seeks signs to avoid responsibility. If a sign tells you what to do, you are not accountable. When signs are absent, responsibility returns to you. This can feel heavy, but it is also empowering. You learn to trust your capacity to choose wisely, even without guarantees. There is also learning in mistakes made without certainty. When you act from alignment rather than prediction, mistakes become feedback instead of failure. You learn faster because you are not defending an identity built on being right. This openness accelerates wisdom in ways certainty never could. Moving without certainty strengthens intuition, not mystical intuition, but the quiet sensitivity to what feels right in the body and mind. This sensitivity grows through use. The more you listen, the clearer it becomes. Certainty would dull this sensitivity. Uncertainty sharpens it. This practice also reduces anxiety over time. Anxiety feeds on imagined futures. When you act without certainty, you stop rehearsing futures you cannot control. Attention returns to what is actually happening. The nervous system slowly learns that uncertainty is survivable. There is also a deep respect for impermanence here. You accept that whatever results arise will change. This acceptance softens attachment. You enjoy progress without clinging. You accept setbacks without despair. Balance emerges not from control, but from understanding change. Moving without certainty also changes how you relate to others. You stop expecting them to provide reassurance you cannot give yourself. Relationships become less dependent and more genuine. You share uncertainty instead of hiding it. This honesty deepens connection. This practice teaches patience in action. You move, but you do not force. You respond, but you do not rush. You allow consequences to unfold without interference. This patience keeps action clean. It prevents panic-driven decisions. There is also a subtle joy that appears, not excitement, but a quiet satisfaction. You are living truthfully. You are no longer waiting for life to start once everything makes sense. Life is happening now, step by step, without a map. Over time, trust shifts. You stop trusting outcomes and start trusting process. You trust that awareness will guide the next step when it arrives. This trust is earned, not assumed. Each step without certainty that does not destroy you builds confidence. Buddhism often speaks of walking the path without knowing the destination. This is not poetic exaggeration, it is a practical instruction. The destination changes as you change. Fixating on it limits growth. Trusting the step allows evolution. Moving without certainty also dissolves regret. When choices are made from presence rather than fear, even mistakes carry less bitterness. You know you acted honestly with what you had. This self-respect softens hindsight. As this practice deepens, uncertainty becomes less threatening. It becomes familiar terrain. You recognize its textures. You know how to breathe inside it. You know how to move slowly through it without freezing. Eventually, you realize that certainty was never the source of safety. Presence was, awareness was. The ability to respond wisely in real time was. This realization changes how you live. The step itself becomes enough. Not because it guarantees success, but because it expresses truth in motion. And when truth moves, even without certainty, it carries its own quiet direction. From here, the path continues not with confidence in outcomes, but with confidence in awareness. You move, you adjust, you learn, and in doing so, you discover that trust was never about knowing where you were going. It was about knowing how to walk when you did not. When you learn to move without certainty, something unexpected happens. Confidence does not rush in to replace doubt. Strength does not suddenly feel strong. Instead, energy thins out. Motivation fades. What once felt meaningful now feels quiet, even dry. And this is where many people assume they have lost their faith. Buddhism points to something deeper. It says this may be the moment when faith becomes real. There is a common belief that faith feels warm, hopeful, and inspiring, that it lifts you, that it reassures you. But much of what is called faith is actually emotion. Emotion rises and falls. It depends on mood, health, sleep, and circumstances. When emotion disappears, people think trust has disappeared with it. What remains feels empty, flat, or heavy. This is not the absence of faith. This is faith stripped of feeling. Faith that does not feel like faith often appears during exhaustion, when you have been patient for a long time, when effort has been steady but results remain unclear, when emotional fuel runs out. At this stage, continuing does not feel noble or spiritual. It feels mechanical, ordinary, sometimes pointless. And yet something keeps you from quitting entirely. That something is quiet trust. This trust does not speak in encouraging words. It does not promise outcomes. It does not protect you from doubt. It simply keeps you oriented. You still show up. You still choose not to turn away. You still act with care, even when you feel nothing. Buddhism recognizes this as a mature form of faith, one that does not depend on inspiration. Doubt often gets a bad reputation, but doubt is not the opposite of faith. Indifference is. Doubt asks questions, it examines, it tests. When faith exists beneath doubt, it allows doubt to pass through without collapse. You do not need to silence doubt to continue. You learn to carry it. Emotional dryness is especially confusing. Practices that once felt nourishing now feel empty. Teachings that once resonated now feel distant. This dryness is not a sign that the path is wrong. It is a sign that attachment to feeling is dissolving. Buddhism teaches that relying on pleasant states creates dependency. Dryness breaks that dependency. When faith no longer feels good, intention becomes clearer. You are no longer practicing because it soothes you. You are practicing because it aligns you. This alignment is quieter than comfort, but stronger. It does not disappear when conditions change. There is also humility in faith that feels thin. You stop assuming that spiritual life exists to make you feel better. You accept that some seasons are barren. This acceptance deepens wisdom. It prevents entitlement. It allows practice to continue without bargaining. Fatigue plays a key role here, not just physical tiredness, but existential tiredness, the kind that comes from carrying effort over time. When fatigue is present, the mind seeks relief. It questions the value of continuing. Buddhism does not deny this fatigue. It invites compassion toward it. You are not asked to be energetic. You are asked to be honest. Faith beneath fatigue looks like doing less, but not quitting. It looks like simplifying, reducing effort to what is essential, letting go of excess striving. This faith is gentle. It respects limits. It does not punish you for being tired. There is also a deepening of sincerity. When enthusiasm fades, what remains is real. You are no longer driven by excitement or identity. You continue because something inside knows this matters, even if it cannot explain why. This knowing is not loud, it is steady. Faith that does not feel like faith also protects you from spiritual comparison. When you are not glowing with inspiration, you stop trying to appear advanced. You become more human. This humanity allows connection. It removes the pressure to perform belief. Buddhism often speaks of equanimity. This is not emotional numbness. It is balance. Faith beneath dryness contributes to equanimity. You learn to remain steady regardless of inner weather. Pleasant states do not inflate you. Unpleasant states do not define you. There is also freedom here. When faith is no longer tied to feeling, you stop chasing spiritual highs. You stop fearing lows. Practice becomes integrated into life rather than separate from it. This integration is a sign of maturity. Doubt continues to arise, but it changes shape. It becomes less personal. You see it as a mental event rather than a verdict. You do not need to resolve every question to continue. You allow uncertainty to exist without making it a problem. Faith beneath doubt is not blind. It is patient. It allows understanding to unfold slowly. It does not demand immediate clarity. This patience reduces inner conflict. You stop fighting your own mind. There is also resilience here. When trust does not rely on feeling, it survives hardship. Loss, disappointment, and confusion do not destroy it. They pass through it. This resilience is quiet but enduring. Emotional dryness also teaches compassion toward others. When you experience spiritual emptiness, you recognize it in others. You stop judging those who feel distant from meaning. This compassion expands awareness beyond self. Faith beneath fatigue also changes how you relate to effort. You stop overexerting. You learn to pace yourself. This pacing allows long-term continuity. Many people burn out because they confuse intensity with devotion. Quiet faith knows the difference. There is a subtle dignity in continuing without inspiration. You are not trying to prove anything. You are honoring a commitment to awareness. This dignity strengthens self-respect. Over time, dryness passes, not suddenly, gradually. And when warmth returns, it feels different, less intoxicating, more grounded. You appreciate it without clinging. You know it will pass again. This knowing keeps balance. Faith that does not feel like faith also teaches trust in process. You learn that meaning is not always felt. Sometimes it is lived first and felt later. This reverses the usual order. You act before you feel certain. You feel aligned before you feel inspired. This kind of faith is invisible. Others may not recognize it. Even you may doubt it exists, but it shows itself through consistency, through restraint, through kindness that persists without reward. Buddhism does not ask you to feel faithful. It asks you to remain aware. Awareness continues regardless of emotion. When awareness continues, faith is present, even if it feels absent. As you move through this phase, something settles. You stop asking whether you believe enough. You stop measuring devotion by emotion. You simply continue. And in that continuation, trust deepens without announcing itself. Faith beneath doubt, fatigue, and dryness is not dramatic. It is ordinary, and because it is ordinary, it lasts. It becomes part of how you live rather than something you feel. From here, trust no longer needs to prove itself. It does not need to be named. It functions quietly, guiding you through days that feel empty and days that feel full without clinging to either. And this quiet trust carries you forward, not by lifting you, but by holding you steady when nothing else does. When faith no longer feels warm and trust continues quietly, the mind does not relax. It looks for proof. It looks for movement. And when it finds silence instead, it begins to worry. This is where another misunderstanding takes hold. The mind starts to believe that nothing happening means something has gone wrong. Silence becomes suspicious. Stillness feels like failure. And without noticing, worth becomes tied to noise. The mind is trained by repetition. From early on, it learns that activity is praised and quiet is questioned. Effort is celebrated when it is visible. Progress is validated when it is measurable. Over time, this conditioning becomes automatic. When the mind does not hear its own noise, it assumes it has stopped working. When there is no inner commentary, it assumes something is missing. Mental noise creates a sense of movement even when nothing meaningful is happening. Thoughts jump, plans form, worries cycle. This activity feels productive because it feels busy. Silence, by contrast, offers no such reassurance. It feels empty, and emptiness scares a mind that equates fullness with value. Speed becomes the mind's shortcut to worth. Fast decisions feel confident. Quick reactions feel intelligent. Immediate answers feel competent. Silence interrupts this pattern. It removes the illusion of control. Without constant thought, the mind does not know how to measure itself. So it reaches for familiar conclusions. It tells you that you are stuck, that you are falling behind, that you should be doing more. This illusion is reinforced by culture. Everything around you rewards speed, faster responses, faster growth, faster results. Quiet processes are invisible. Silence has no metrics, so the mind borrows the world's values and applies them inward. If there is no visible movement inside, it assumes there is no value. But silence is not the absence of activity, it is the absence of interference. When mental noise quiets, deeper processes become possible. Attention sharpens, sensitivity increases, awareness settles. These shifts do not announce themselves, they are subtle, and because they are subtle, the mind often overlooks them. The mind mistakes silence for failure because silence does not feed identity. Identity is built from stories. Stories require words. Silence interrupts storytelling. Without a narrative, the self feels undefined. And undefined feels unsafe to a mind that relies on labels to feel real. There is also a fear of being left behind. When silence slows you down, comparison becomes uncomfortable. Others appear to be moving, achieving, speaking, posting, producing. Silence creates the impression that you are out of sync. The mind interprets this as danger. It urges you to rejoin the noise to prove relevance. Buddhism recognizes this pattern as attachment to becoming. The mind wants to become something, to improve, to advance. Silence pauses this project. It removes the sense of becoming, and without becoming, the mind fears it is dissolving. In truth, it is resting. Silence also exposes dependency on thought. When thoughts slow, you see how often you relied on them for reassurance. Planning felt like control. Worry felt like preparation. Analysis felt like progress. Silence reveals that many thoughts were not helping. They were filling space. This realization can be unsettling. The mind may rush to recreate noise to avoid discomfort. It may invent problems, revisit old concerns, generate urgency, all to avoid the vulnerability of quiet. Unlearning the illusion that silence equals failure requires patience. You cannot convince the mind with logic alone. It must experience safety in silence. It must learn through repetition that nothing bad happens when thoughts slow. This learning begins by noticing how silence feels in the body. Often silence brings a subtle relaxation. Muscles soften, breathing deepens. This physical response is evidence that silence is not harmful. The body recognizes rest before the mind does. Silence also allows perception to widen. When the mind is noisy, attention narrows to thoughts. When noise fades, senses awaken. Sounds become clearer. Light feels softer. Small details stand out. This sensory clarity is a form of intelligence the mind often ignores. The mind mistakes silence for failure because it does not know how to measure presence. Presence has no scoreboard. It does not accumulate points. It does not move toward completion. It simply exists. And because it does not aim, it feels useless to a goal-driven mind. But presence changes how you respond. When presence is strong, reactions slow. You pause before speaking. You listen more fully. You notice subtle shifts in others. These changes may not feel productive, but they transform relationships and decisions. Silence also weakens compulsive thinking. Without constant stimulation, patterns lose momentum. Thoughts arise and pass without being chased. This freedom can feel unfamiliar. The mind may interpret unfamiliar as wrong, but unfamiliar is often the doorway to growth. There is also grief hidden here. Silence removes distractions that once kept pain at bay. Old emotions may surface, unresolved feelings may appear. The mind may conclude that silence caused these feelings. In reality, silence allowed them to be seen. Unlearning the illusion means allowing this surfacing without judgment, recognizing that what appears in silence was already there. Silence did not create it. Silence revealed it. The mind also equates speed with intelligence. Quick answers feel smart. Silence feels uncertain. But wisdom often requires pause. It requires time for complexity to settle. Silence allows this settling. It prevents premature conclusions. When silence becomes familiar, a shift occurs. You stop needing to fill every gap. Conversations deepen. Listening improves. You notice that not everything requires response. This restraint refines communication. The illusion of silence as failure also dissolves when you notice its effects over time. You become less reactive, less drained, more grounded. These changes are cumulative. They do not appear all at once, but they are unmistakable. Silence also teaches patience with not knowing. You stop demanding immediate understanding. You allow questions to remain open. This openness invites insight that force would block. The mind fears silence because it cannot predict it. Silence does not follow linear rules. It unfolds organically. This unpredictability threatens control, but letting go of control reveals adaptability. There is also a deeper worth discovered in silence. Worth that is not earned through effort, worth that exists without achievement. This worth is unsettling at first because it contradicts conditioning, but once felt, it becomes grounding. Unlearning the illusion requires repeated exposure, sitting with silence, walking in silence, allowing pauses. Each time, the mind protests less. It learns that silence does not erase you, it clarifies you. Over time, silence stops feeling empty. It feels spacious. It becomes a place of refuge rather than threat. You return to it not because you failed, but because you recognize its value. The mind still tries to equate speed with worth. That habit does not disappear overnight, but awareness loosens its grip. You see the pattern without obeying it. This seeing is freedom. Silence then becomes a teacher. It shows you how much effort was unnecessary, how much noise was habit, how much worth was self-imposed pressure. From this place, movement becomes more intentional. You act because it is needed, not because silence feels uncomfortable. You speak because words add value, not because quiet feels wrong. The illusion fades gradually. Silence stops being a verdict and becomes a foundation, a place where awareness rests, where value is not measured, where trust continues quietly. And in that quiet you realize that silence was never failure. It was the space where meaning was learning how to breathe. When silence is no longer mistaken for failure, another tension quietly rises. You may begin to sense that effort has been sincere, awareness has deepened, and yet outcomes remain unchanged. Nothing obvious arrives to confirm the work you have done. This is where impatience turns subtle. Not loud frustration, but a quiet question that lingers. When will this show results? Buddhism meets this question with a teaching that unsettles the modern mind. Karma ripens in its own time, not yours. There is a deep human habit of tying effort to schedule. You do something good and expect something good back soon. You practice patience and expect peace to arrive on cue. You change behavior and expect life to respond accordingly. This expectation feels reasonable, but it is not how causes unfold. Karmic ripening does not follow clocks, calendars, or emotional readiness. It follows conditions. Karma in Buddhism is not fate. It is not reward or punishment. It is cause and effect unfolding through layers of influence. Each action plants a seed, but seeds do not sprout the moment they are planted. They wait for soil, water, temperature, and time. Many of these conditions are outside your control. The mind struggles with this lack of authority. It wants timelines. Karma does not offer them. When results do not appear, the mind often assumes effort was wasted. This assumption creates unnecessary suffering. Buddhism teaches that unseen ripening is still ripening. Just because effects are delayed does not mean causes are inactive. Much of karma works invisibly, adjusting internal conditions before external ones change. Human timelines are shaped by desire. We want relief now, we want clarity now, we want confirmation now. But desire itself becomes an obstacle when it demands immediacy. It narrows perception. It blinds you to subtle shifts. It makes you overlook small changes because they are not dramatic enough. Karmic ripening often begins internally, a softer reaction, a slower impulse, a different choice made quietly. These changes may not alter circumstances immediately, but they alter trajectory. Over time, trajectories matter more than moments. There is also the accumulation of old causes. Present experience is shaped by countless past actions, many forgotten. Expecting new effort to override all previous conditions instantly is unrealistic. Buddhism encourages patience not as resignation, but as realism. Surrender plays a crucial role here. Not surrender as giving up, but surrender as releasing the demand to control timing. When you surrender timelines, tension loosens. You stop gripping the future. Energy returns to the present. Peace begins to replace strain. Surrender also restores trust in process. You recognize that effort has value even when outcomes are delayed. This trust prevents burnout. It allows continuity. You continue practicing not because you expect reward soon, but because alignment matters now. There is grief hidden in delayed ripening, grief for time invested without visible return, grief for hopes postponed. Buddhism does not dismiss this grief. It invites you to hold it gently, to feel disappointment without turning it into self-blame. Delayed results often test sincerity. When reward is postponed, motivation reveals itself. Are you acting for outcome or for integrity? This question becomes unavoidable. Surrender clarifies intention by removing payoff. Karmic ripening off schedule also teaches humility. You are reminded that life is larger than personal will. This humility softens resistance. It allows cooperation with reality rather than constant negotiation. There is also protection in delay. Immediate results can inflate ego. Delayed results allow wisdom to mature before success arrives. This prevents misuse of outcome. It ensures readiness. Surrender does not mean passivity. You still act, you still care, but you stop demanding control over when effects appear. This shift reduces anxiety. Anxiety thrives on anticipation. Surrender releases anticipation. There is also freedom from comparison. When timelines dissolve, you stop measuring progress against others. Everyone's karmic conditions differ. Comparison loses meaning. Delayed ripening teaches patience with complexity. Life rarely responds to single actions. Patterns unfold through networks of causes. Understanding this reduces frustration. You stop expecting linear outcomes from non-linear systems. Surrender also deepens compassion. When you see how long change takes, you judge others less harshly. You recognize that effort may be happening beneath the surface. This compassion extends inward as well. Karmic delay invites presence. When future payoff is uncertain, attention returns to what can be done now. This presence reduces suffering created by expectation. There is also resilience built here. When peace does not depend on immediate results, it becomes more stable. You learn to endure uncertainty without collapsing. Surrender restores peace because it removes the struggle against time. Time is not an enemy, it is a condition. Fighting it drains energy, accepting it frees energy. Delayed results often carry deeper lessons. You may be learning restraint, humility, or endurance rather than success. These lessons are harder to measure but more transformative. Surrender also teaches trust in unseen processes. Just as silence revealed hidden activity, delay reveals hidden maturation. You learn to respect what you cannot see. There is also relief in letting go of deadlines for becoming. You stop pressuring yourself to arrive. You allow yourself to be in process. Karmic ripening off schedule teaches patience not as waiting, but as continuing without certainty. This patience stabilizes the mind. It prevents despair. Surrender does not guarantee outcomes. It guarantees peace with unfolding. This peace is not complacency. It is grounded acceptance. Over time, you may notice that results appear unexpectedly, not when demanded, but when conditions align. This unpredictability reinforces humility and trust. Delayed ripening also teaches impermanence. Results, when they come, do not last forever. Knowing this prevents attachment. You appreciate without clinging. Surrender restores peace by shifting focus from outcome to alignment. You measure life by integrity rather than achievement. This measurement is kinder. There is also a quiet dignity in continuing without visible reward. You are no longer negotiating with life. You are participating. Karmic timing cannot be forced, but it can be trusted. Trust grows through experience. Each time delayed effort does not destroy you, trust strengthens. Eventually, impatience softens. You stop asking when and start asking how to remain present. This shift transforms waiting into living. Karmic ripening off schedule teaches you to walk with time rather than race it. When you do, peace is no longer postponed. It arrives now, in the willingness to allow life to unfold without resistance. And in that allowance, effort becomes lighter. Trust deepens, and the path continues without the burden of expectation. When you stop arguing with time and allow life to unfold without forcing it, something very plain remains. No excitement, no clear payoff, just the same day arriving again. The same choice waiting to be made again. This is where many people quietly drift away, not because they lost faith, but because repetition feels invisible. And yet this is where one of the deepest forms of courage begins to show itself. There is a special discomfort in doing the right thing over and over with no change in scenery. The mind likes novelty. It likes progress that can be pointed to. Repetition offers neither. It offers sameness, familiar effort, predictable routine. And because nothing dramatic happens, the mind assumes nothing important is happening at all. But repetition is not stagnation, it is refinement. Each time you repeat a small right action, you meet it from a slightly different inner place. You are not the same person you were yesterday, even if the action looks identical. Awareness shifts subtly, resistance changes shape, understanding deepens quietly. The courage of repetition is quiet, because it does not announce itself. It does not look heroic. It does not come with recognition. Often, no one knows you are doing it. Sometimes even you forget why you started, and yet you continue. This continuation trains the mind in steadiness. Repetition removes drama from effort. Without novelty, motivation cannot rely on excitement. Without praise, effort cannot rely on validation. What remains is intention. You discover whether your actions are rooted in alignment or dependent on reward. This discovery is uncomfortable but clarifying. Doing the same small right action daily builds trust with yourself. Each repetition is a promise kept. Over time, these promises accumulate. You begin to see yourself as someone who does what they say they will do, even when it is boring. This self-trust is grounding. It does not depend on success. It depends on consistency. Repetition also softens impatience. When you know tomorrow will look similar to today, you stop rushing through the present. You settle into rhythm. This rhythm stabilizes the nervous system. Life feels less like a race and more like a practice. There is also humility in repetition. You accept that growth does not require constant reinvention. You stop trying to be impressive. You focus on being sincere. This humility protects you from ego inflation. It keeps effort clean. Small actions repeated daily also bypass resistance. Large goals trigger fear. Small actions feel manageable. Over time, these manageable actions reshape habits. Habits reshape character. Character reshapes destiny quietly. Repetition teaches patience with imperfection. You do not expect each action to be perfect. You expect it to be done. This reduces self-criticism. You learn to show up even when you feel off. This flexibility prevents burnout. There is also a deep reliability formed through repetition. Life becomes less chaotic because certain anchors remain. You know some things will be done regardless of mood. This predictability creates inner safety. Repetition without reward challenges the belief that effort must be compensated immediately. You learn to value the act itself. This shifts motivation from external to internal. Effort becomes its own meaning. In Buddhist practice, repetition is central. Not because repetition is magical, but because it trains awareness. Each repetition is a chance to notice subtle changes. How does this feel today? Where does resistance arise? What has softened? These observations deepen insight. Repetition also reveals attachment. On days when repetition feels unbearable, you see what you are hoping to get from it. Recognition, relief, transformation. Seeing this attachment allows it to loosen. There is also courage in facing boredom honestly. Boredom is often a sign that the mind wants stimulation, not that the action lacks value. Staying present through boredom strengthens attention. Attention becomes less dependent on excitement. Repetition builds quiet confidence. You stop doubting whether you are capable of long-term effort. You know you can continue even when enthusiasm fades. This confidence is stable because it is earned. Daily repetition also creates momentum without urgency. You move forward steadily without pressure. This steadiness outlasts bursts of motivation. It supports sustainable growth. There is also compassion in repetition. When you repeat kindness, patience, or restraint daily, these qualities become natural. They stop feeling forced. They become part of how you respond. Repetition teaches respect for process. You stop looking for shortcuts. You understand that depth comes from return. This respect reduces frustration. There is also a quiet joy that appears over time. Not excitement, but familiarity. A sense of belonging to your own life. You are no longer chasing something else. You are participating fully in what is here. Repetition without novelty trains presence. You cannot rely on excitement to stay engaged. You must notice details. This noticing deepens awareness. There is also freedom here. When you accept repetition, you stop fighting reality. Many aspects of life are repetitive. Accepting this reduces suffering. Repetition also teaches that change is cumulative. You may not notice progress day to day, but looking back, you see difference. This delayed recognition reinforces trust. The quiet courage of repetition lies in continuing without applause, in choosing alignment over recognition, in valuing integrity over excitement. Over time, repetition shapes identity. You become someone who practices, someone who shows up, someone who does not abandon effort because it is ordinary. This courage is not loud. It does not need to be seen. It carries you forward gently day after day, building something durable beneath the surface. And as this steadiness settles, the path continues not with urgency, but with reliability. You walk not because it is thrilling, but because it is true. When repetition settles into your life and effort becomes steady rather than dramatic, another truth quietly reveals itself. Some things do not heal quickly, no matter how patiently you show up. Some wounds resist schedules, discipline, and good intentions, and this is where a deeper lesson begins. Not about fixing, not about progress, but about what slow healing gives you that fast healing never can. There is a special kind of frustration that comes from long recovery. Not the sharp pain of injury, but the dull ache of time passing without resolution. You do the work, you rest, you try again, and still, the weight remains. Many people interpret this as failure. Buddhism sees it as education. Slow healing teaches in ways comfort cannot. Quick recovery often bypasses understanding. When pain leaves fast, it leaves little trace. You return to life unchanged, but when struggle stays, it reshapes perception. You become intimate with limitation. You learn what it feels like to carry something unresolved. This familiarity opens the heart. Prolonged struggle softens judgment. When you live with pain, impatience fades. You stop expecting others to be fine on demand. You recognize that effort does not always equal relief. This recognition deepens empathy naturally without effort. Slow healing also dissolves the illusion of control. You realize that not everything responds to willpower. This humility changes how you relate to others. You stop offering quick solutions. You listen more. You respect the complexity of suffering. There is also vulnerability in slow healing. You cannot hide behind improvement. You remain exposed longer. This exposure teaches tenderness. You learn to treat yourself gently because harshness no longer works. This gentleness extends outward. Prolonged struggle teaches presence. When pain does not leave, distraction loses power. You must learn to be with discomfort without constant resistance. This presence strengthens awareness. You become less reactive to pain in others because you recognize it. Slow healing also reveals how deeply connected suffering is. You notice shared patterns: fear, grief, shame, loneliness. These experiences are not unique to you. Seeing this reduces isolation. Compassion grows from recognition. There is patience learned here that cannot be taught. Not patience as waiting, but patience as endurance with kindness. You stop fighting your own pace. This patience becomes a gift you offer others without trying. Quick recovery often reinforces independence. Slow healing teaches interdependence. You learn to accept help, to ask, to receive. This vulnerability builds connection. It reminds you that healing is relational. Prolonged struggle also teaches respect for invisible pain. You stop assuming that someone who looks fine is fine. You know how much can be carried quietly. This awareness changes how you move through the world. Slow healing reshapes expectations. You stop believing that life owes you ease. This is not bitterness, it is realism. And realism allows compassion to be grounded rather than idealistic. There is also wisdom gained about boundaries. When energy is limited, you learn what matters. You stop overgiving. You protect what little strength you have. This protection teaches you to respect others' limits as well. Slow healing creates depth. It slows you down enough to notice subtle emotional layers. You understand grief not as a moment, but as a process. This understanding allows you to sit with others' pain without rushing them. There is also a quiet courage developed here. Continuing to live fully while healing slowly requires strength. Not the strength of overcoming, but the strength of allowing. This strength is gentle but resilient. Prolonged struggle teaches you how to be present without fixing. This skill is rare. Many people rush to solve discomfort. Slow healing teaches you to stay, to witness. This witnessing is healing in itself. Slow healing also reveals the difference between sympathy and compassion. Sympathy stays outside pain. Compassion enters it. Living with long-term struggle opens that door naturally. There is also gratitude that forms differently here. Not gratitude for relief, but gratitude for understanding. You appreciate moments of ease without clinging. You appreciate others' kindness more deeply. Quick recovery often leaves little room for reflection. Slow healing forces reflection. You ask deeper questions, not why this happened, but how to live with it. These questions mature awareness. Prolonged struggle also reduces fear of others' pain. When you have sat with your own, you are less afraid of theirs. You do not need to escape. You can stay present. Slow healing teaches non-judgment. You stop labeling experiences as good or bad so quickly. You see complexity. This reduces harshness toward yourself and others. There is also a reshaping of identity. You are no longer defined by strength or productivity. You learn to value being overdoing. This shift deepens compassion. Slow healing builds trust in process without guarantees. You learn to live well even without resolution. This ability brings peace that does not depend on circumstances. Prolonged struggle teaches reverence for small comforts, rest, quiet, gentle connection. These become meaningful. This appreciation changes how you treat everyday life. There is also forgiveness learned here, toward yourself, toward your body, toward your past. Slow healing does not allow shortcuts. Forgiveness emerges gradually. Slow healing deepens empathy because it removes distance. You no longer see suffering as abstract. It becomes personal, and what is personal becomes sacred. Quick recovery can close the heart. Slow healing opens it, not because pain is good, but because awareness grows around it. Over time, you notice that compassion becomes effortless. You do not try to be kind, you understand, and understanding naturally expresses itself as care. Slow healing also teaches acceptance without resignation. You accept what is without giving up on what could be. This balance is wise. There is also humility in knowing you are not finished. Healing continues. This humility keeps you open. It prevents arrogance. Slow healing teaches you how to walk alongside pain rather than ahead of it. This companionship is what you later offer others. Eventually, you realize that what took the longest to heal taught you the most about being human, about limits, about kindness, about patience. The struggle did not make you better by fixing you. It made you better by softening you. And from that softness, compassion flows not as an idea, but as a lived response. As compassion deepens through slow healing, a quiet shift begins to take place. Pain may still be present. Circumstances may look the same. The world around you does not suddenly rearrange itself to reflect your effort. And yet, something fundamental has changed, not outside, inside. This is one of the most overlooked moments on any path. The moment when nothing changes, but you do. There is a strange disappointment that comes when growth does not alter the surface of life. The same problems appear. The same environment surrounds you. The same limitations remain. The mind expects transformation to announce itself through external change. When that does not happen, it assumes transformation has failed. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Inner evolution often precedes outer change by a long distance. When nothing changes externally, awareness becomes the only place to look. You begin to notice how you meet the same situation differently. The trigger still exists, but the reaction is softer. The challenge still stands, but panic no longer leads. These shifts are subtle, easy to dismiss, but they are signs of real change. Inner evolution rarely feels dramatic. It feels quiet, almost ordinary. You notice it in pauses, in restraint, in the moment you choose not to say what you used to say, in the breath you take before responding. These moments do not reshape the world, but they reshape you. The mind struggles to value this kind of change because it cannot display it. There is nothing to point to. No before and after picture. But Buddhism places great importance on how experience is met rather than what experience looks like. The quality of attention determines suffering more than circumstances themselves. When nothing changes outside, you are forced to rely on internal reference points. You stop waiting for life to validate your growth. You begin to feel it directly. This builds confidence that is not dependent on outcome. You trust your inner movement even when the world remains still. There is also a kind of grief here, grief that effort did not buy escape, grief that growth did not earn reward. This grief is honest. Buddhism does not dismiss it. It invites you to stay with it, to see what expectation it reveals. Often the expectation is that inner work should guarantee outer relief. Letting go of this expectation is part of maturation. Inner evolution shows itself through tolerance. You can sit with discomfort longer. You do not need immediate resolution. This tolerance changes how you experience time. Moments stretch without becoming unbearable. This is a profound shift. When circumstances stay the same, patterns become clearer. You see how much suffering came not from the situation, but from resistance to it. As resistance softens, suffering reduces, even if the situation does not. This insight changes everything. Inner change also reveals itself through choice. Faced with the same option, you choose differently, or you choose the same thing but with less inner conflict. Either way, the experience changes. Freedom grows quietly, and there is also a deepening of responsibility here. You stop blaming circumstances for how you feel. This does not mean you approve of them. It means you recognize where your power lies. This recognition is empowering. When nothing changes externally, patience becomes real. Not patience as waiting for life to improve, but patience as the ability to live well within limits. This patience brings dignity. You are no longer bargaining with reality. Inner evolution also changes how you relate to identity. You stop defining yourself by situation. You are not just someone stuck in a certain life. You are someone developing awareness within it. This distinction protects self-worth. There is also a quiet joy that appears. Not because things are better, but because you are less at war. Peace becomes less conditional. It no longer waits for permission from circumstances. When nothing changes outside, gratitude changes shape. You stop being grateful only for improvement. You become grateful for steadiness, for understanding, for moments of ease within difficulty. This gratitude is grounded. Inner evolution also reshapes hope. Hope becomes less about escape and more about integrity. You hope to remain aligned, not necessarily to be rescued. This hope is sustainable. There is a strengthening of discernment. You see which battles matter and which do not. You stop spending energy trying to control what cannot be controlled. This conservation of energy brings clarity. When circumstances remain identical, you may notice less urgency to explain yourself. You do not need others to see your growth. This privacy protects sincerity. You live differently without announcing it. Inner change also appears in how you treat your own mind. You are less harsh, less demanding. You allow yourself to be unfinished. This allowance reduces inattention. There is also a new relationship with effort. You stop pushing for visible results. You focus on quality of engagement. This focus improves experience even without change. When nothing changes outside, comparison loses power. You stop measuring progress by milestones. You measure it by awareness. This internal metric is kinder and more accurate. Inner evolution also deepens compassion. You recognize that many people are growing invisibly. You stop assuming that unchanged circumstances mean unchanged effort. This softens judgment. There is also resilience built here. You learn that growth does not depend on favorable conditions. You can evolve anywhere. This knowledge brings freedom. When nothing changes externally, wisdom has space to settle. Without distraction, insight integrates. You live it rather than think about it. This embodiment is slow but lasting. Inner change also reduces fear of stagnation. You realize that movement is happening even when it is not visible. This realization restores trust. There is also a shift in how you experience success. Success becomes less about change and more about alignment. You feel successful when you respond wisely, not when life improves. When nothing changes outside, acceptance deepens. Not resignation, but clarity. You see what is. You stop fighting it unnecessarily. This acceptance frees energy. Inner evolution also teaches humility. You see how much remains to learn. This openness keeps growth alive. There is also a subtle strength that forms. You are no longer easily shaken by lack of progress. You know that change is happening where it matters. When nothing changes externally, inner evolution becomes its own reward. You experience less suffering, more steadiness, more clarity. These are not small things. Over time, circumstances may change, or they may not, but you are no longer waiting to live fully. You are already doing so, from the inside out. And this is one of the deepest truths of the path. Life does not need to look different for you to be different within it. And that difference changes everything about how life is lived. When you begin to recognize inner change without outer confirmation, another challenge quietly appears. You start to see how much of your self-worth was tied to becoming finished. Better, clearer, resolved. And when you notice how much of you is still forming, a familiar pressure rises. The urge to fix yourself, to rush completion, to reject what is not yet whole. This is where a deeper discipline is required, not the discipline of improvement, but the discipline of trust. There is a deep habit in the human mind to equate incompleteness with failure. If something is unfinished, it feels wrong. If you are still struggling, it feels unacceptable. This habit forms early. You are praised for results, not for process. You are valued when you appear put together, not when you are still learning. Over time, this conditioning turns inward. You begin to treat yourself as a project that must be completed before it deserves care. Trusting an unfinished self goes against this conditioning. It asks you to stay present with who you are now, not who you plan to become. This is uncomfortable because the unfinished self carries uncertainty. It does not offer a clear identity. It does not promise resolution. And yet, this is the self that is actually alive. The discipline here is subtle. It is not about lowering standards or giving up on growth. It is about refusing to make self-acceptance conditional. You allow yourself to be incomplete without turning that fact into a verdict. This requires restraint. The restraint to not attack yourself for what is still developing. Many people believe self-criticism motivates growth. In reality, it often creates fear. Fear narrows awareness. It makes learning rigid. Trusting an unfinished self creates safety. Safety allows exploration. Exploration allows growth. This sequence is often misunderstood. Allowing incompleteness does not mean indulging harmful patterns. It means recognizing that change happens through relationship, not punishment. When you relate to yourself with patience, you create the conditions for real transformation. There is also grief here. Grief for the ideal version of yourself you thought you should be by now. Letting go of that image hurts. But holding on to it hurts more. Trusting the unfinished self means releasing unrealistic timelines. It means accepting that development unfolds unevenly. The unfinished self is not a problem to solve. It is a process to live. When you stop treating it as an error, tension reduces, energy returns. You become more curious and less defensive. This curiosity fuels learning more effectively than shame ever could. Trusting yourself while unfinished also requires humility. You admit that you do not yet know everything. You allow yourself to be wrong. This humility keeps the mind flexible. Flexibility is essential for growth. There is a common fear that acceptance will lead to stagnation, but acceptance does not mean complacency. It means clarity. You see what is without distortion. From this clear seeing, wise action becomes possible. When you trust your unfinished self, you stop hiding parts of yourself. You allow contradictions. You accept that growth includes setbacks. This honesty reduces inner fragmentation. You no longer split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. There is also a strengthening of self-respect. You respect yourself enough to not demand instant completion. You acknowledge effort without demanding perfection. This respect becomes a foundation for resilience. Trusting incompleteness also changes how you relate to mistakes. Mistakes become information rather than proof of inadequacy. You respond with adjustment instead of judgment. This response accelerates learning. There is also relief here. The pressure to arrive dissolves. You no longer feel like life is on hold until you are finished. You live now as you are while still growing. This allows joy to coexist with effort. Allowing yourself to be unfinished also deepens compassion for others. You stop expecting people to be resolved versions of themselves. You recognize that everyone is in process. This recognition softens relationships. There is also courage required to show up as you are without apology, to participate without feeling fully ready. This courage is quiet but transformative. It keeps you engaged with life instead of waiting on the sidelines. Trusting the unfinished self also changes how you experience time. You stop racing toward a future identity. You settle into ongoing development. This reduces anxiety. You are no longer chasing completion. There is also a shift in motivation. You stop growing to escape who you are. You grow to express who you are becoming. This difference matters. Growth rooted in rejection feels heavy. Growth rooted in trust feels alive. Allowing incompleteness teaches patience with complexity. Human change is not linear. Some parts of you evolve faster than others. Trust allows uneven growth without panic. There is also an easing of comparison. When you accept being unfinished, you stop measuring yourself against others' progress. You recognize that everyone's path unfolds differently. This reduces envy and insecurity. Trusting an unfinished self also strengthens boundaries. You stop overextending to prove worth. You allow yourself to rest. This rest supports long-term development. There is also integrity here. You stop pretending to be more resolved than you are. This honesty aligns inner and outer life. Alignment reduces stress. Allowing yourself to be unfinished creates space for learning from life rather than controlling it. You remain open. You remain responsive. This openness keeps wisdom alive. There is also a deep kindness learned. You treat yourself as you would treat someone you care about who is still learning. This kindness changes your inner dialogue. It becomes more supportive, less harsh. Trusting incompleteness also changes how you handle uncertainty. You accept not knowing as part of the path. This acceptance reduces fear. There is also strength here. You are not fragile because you are unfinished. You are adaptable. Adaptability is strength. Allowing yourself to be unfinished removes the false divide between now and later. Life is not postponed until completion. It is lived continuously. This realization brings presence. There is also freedom in letting go of the fantasy of arrival. You stop waiting for the moment when everything makes sense. You engage with life as it is. Trusting the unfinished self also protects against burnout. You stop demanding constant improvement. You allow integration. This balance sustains growth. There is also wisdom in recognizing that some things mature only through time. You cannot force them. Trusting this reduces frustration. Allowing incompleteness teaches you how to stay connected to yourself even when you are disappointed with progress. This connection is essential. There is also a quiet joy that appears, not joy because you are done, but joy because you are allowed to be. This joy is gentle and real. Trusting an unfinished self is a discipline because it must be practiced repeatedly. The mind will return to self-judgment. Each time, you choose patience instead. This choice reshapes your inner world. Over time, you notice that growth continues naturally when resistance softens. You become more whole not by forcing completion, but by allowing development. The unfinished self is not a flaw, it is a living process. When you trust it, you stop fighting yourself. And when you stop fighting yourself, growth finds its own pace. This trust does not end the journey. It makes the journey livable. It allows you to walk forward without rejecting where you are standing. And in that allowance, something profound happens. You begin to feel at home in your own becoming. When you begin to feel at home in your own becoming, another experience quietly takes center stage. It does not arrive with pain or fear. It arrives with dullness, with flatness, with the sense that nothing is happening and nothing is interesting. Boredom. This is the moment many people reach for distraction without thinking, but boredom, when met honestly, is not an enemy. It is an unopened door. Boredom appears when the mind runs out of stimulation, when novelty fades, when the familiar no longer entertains. The mind interprets this as a problem to fix. It says, something is missing, something is wrong. But boredom is often a signal that the surface layers of experience have been exhausted. What remains is depth. The modern mind is trained to avoid boredom at all costs. Noise is always available. Screens, tasks, conversations, thoughts. Boredom threatens this constant motion. It removes the usual rewards. Without stimulation, the mind feels exposed, and exposure feels uncomfortable. But boredom is not emptiness. It is the absence of distraction. When distraction falls away, awareness has space to settle. This settling feels unfamiliar. The mind does not know what to do without something to chase, so it labels the moment as boring. In Buddhist understanding, boredom is a threshold. It appears when craving weakens. When the pull toward entertainment loosens, attention is freed. But freedom can feel like nothingness before it feels like peace. Many people turn back at this point, never discovering what boredom reveals. Boredom slows time. Minutes stretch. Sensations become more noticeable. Restlessness rises. This restlessness is not caused by boredom. It is revealed by it. Without stimulation, you feel the urge to escape more clearly. This clarity is valuable. It shows you where attachment lives. When you stay with boredom instead of escaping it, something shifts. Attention drops out of the mind and into the body. You notice breathing, posture, subtle tension. These details were always present, but noise covered them. Boredom removes the cover. There is wisdom here because presence lives in simplicity. When nothing exciting happens, you are left with what is. This is the ground of insight. Insight does not require intensity. It requires honesty. Boredom also dissolves the belief that life must always feel meaningful to be meaningful. It teaches that value is not dependent on stimulation. Ordinary moments contain depth when they are met fully. There is discomfort in boredom because it removes identity props. When you are not doing, producing, or consuming, who are you? This question surfaces naturally. Buddhism does not rush to answer it. It lets it sit. Letting the question remain is part of the teaching. Boredom also reveals impatience, the desire for something else, somewhere else, someone else. Watching this desire without obeying it trains restraint. Restraint strengthens attention. There is also creativity hidden here. When the mind stops consuming, it begins to notice connections. Subtle ideas arise, not because you forced them, but because space allowed them. Many insights emerge from boredom, not excitement. Boredom teaches you how dependent you are on stimulation for mood regulation. Without entertainment, emotions surface. Sadness, irritation, loneliness. These emotions were already there. Boredom gives them room. Meeting them builds emotional maturity. When boredom is allowed, the nervous system recalibrates. Constant stimulation keeps it activated. Boredom invites rest. At first, rest feels uncomfortable. Over time, it feels nourishing. There is also humility here. You stop expecting life to entertain you. You accept responsibility for how you meet moments. This acceptance reduces entitlement. It deepens gratitude. Boredom sharpens perception. Without distraction, senses awaken. You notice sounds you ignored. Light shifts, small movements. The world becomes more detailed. Presence deepens naturally. There is also patience learned here, waiting without demand, allowing moments to unfold. This patience reduces anxiety. You stop rushing time. Boredom challenges the idea that excitement equals aliveness. You discover that quiet awareness is also alive, in some ways more alive. There is fear beneath boredom, fear of stillness, fear of self, fear of nothing happening. Staying with boredom gently exposes these fears. Exposure weakens them. Boredom also teaches trust. Trust that meaning does not disappear when stimulation does. Trust that awareness is enough. This trust is subtle but transformative. When boredom is resisted, it grows unpleasant. When it is allowed, it opens. What felt dull becomes spacious. What felt empty becomes receptive. There is also discipline here, the discipline to not immediately escape, to stay, to observe. This discipline builds attention muscles that distraction weakens. Boredom teaches you how to be with yourself without entertainment. This ability is rare. It creates inner companionship. You are no longer afraid of your own company. There is also insight into craving. You see how often desire arises not from need, but from habit. Recognizing this weakens its grip. Boredom reveals the mind's addiction to change. Change feels safe. Stillness feels risky, but insight lives in stillness. When boredom deepens, it often transforms into calm. Not dramatic calm, a quiet ease. This ease is stable because it does not depend on conditions. There is also compassion learned here. When you know boredom intimately, you understand why others seek distraction. This understanding softens judgment. Boredom teaches the difference between fullness and stimulation. Fullness comes from presence. Stimulation comes from novelty. Presence lasts longer. There is also a reclaiming of time. Boredom returns time to you. You stop filling every moment. Time becomes spacious. This spaciousness allows reflection. Boredom also dismantles the pressure to constantly improve. You rest from becoming. This rest integrates growth. There is wisdom in seeing boredom not as absence, but as invitation. An invitation to notice, to feel, to be. Over time, boredom loses its edge. It becomes a familiar doorway. You recognize it as a signal to slow down, to turn inward. Insight often arrives quietly in these moments, not as answers, but as shifts in perception. You see things differently without knowing why. Boredom teaches that depth is not hidden behind complexity. It is revealed through simplicity. When you stop fearing boredom, you stop fearing stillness. When you stop fearing stillness, presence becomes natural. This presence changes how you live. You are less restless, less driven, more attentive. Boredom no longer feels like wasted time. It feels like unoccupied space, and unoccupied space is where understanding grows. The wisdom hidden in boredom is not flashy. It does not announce itself. It waits patiently for those willing to stay. And when you stay, boredom stops being empty. It becomes quiet ground. a place where awareness rests, where insight emerges, where life reveals itself without needing to entertain you. When boredom softens into presence and restlessness loses its urgency, attention begins to settle on what is actually happening. Not big moments, not dramatic changes, just small movements, small choices, small efforts that once felt too minor to matter. This is where another habit of the mind reveals itself. The habit of dismissing what is small, of overlooking what is quiet, of believing that only big steps count. There is a deep conditioning that teaches you to value effort by its size. Big changes feel worthy, small actions feel embarrassing. You tell yourself that if you cannot do more, you should wait. That partial effort is not real effort. That unless you can give everything, giving something is pointless. This belief quietly stops many paths before they begin. Honoring small steps requires humility. It asks you to bow not to achievement but to sincerity, to recognize that effort does not need to be impressive to be sacred. This goes against the voice that says you must earn your right to continue by doing more. Small steps are often the only steps available. Energy fluctuates, circumstances limit, healing takes time. When you wait for ideal conditions, movement stops. When you honor small steps, life continues. There is a tenderness required to respect minimal effort. You must stop measuring worth by output. You must allow yourself to act within your capacity rather than against it. This is not lowering standards. It is aligning standards with reality. Small steps keep you connected. They maintain relationship with the path. Even when momentum is low, a small action keeps the thread unbroken. This continuity matters more than intensity. The mind often says small steps are meaningless, but meaning is cumulative. One small action rarely transforms a life, but repeated small actions reshape direction. Over time, direction determines destination. Honoring minimal effort also protects against self-rejection. When you dismiss small steps, you dismiss yourself. You tell yourself that who you are today is not enough to begin. This creates shame. Shame paralyzes. Respect liberates. In Buddhist practice, a single breath taken with awareness is considered complete practice. Not because it solves everything, but because it honors presence. The value lies in sincerity, not scale. Small steps also build trust. Each time you act within your capacity, you prove to yourself that you can continue. This trust accumulates quietly. It does not shout. It steadies. There is also patience learned here. When progress is small, you must wait without frustration. This waiting trains endurance. It strengthens the ability to stay without rushing. Honoring small steps also changes how you view others. You stop expecting dramatic change. You recognize effort where you once saw stagnation. This recognition deepens compassion. Small steps protect you from burnout. Large efforts demand recovery. Small efforts can be sustained. Sustainability matters more than bursts of motivation. There is also dignity in doing what you can, even when it feels insignificant, especially when it feels insignificant. Dignity does not come from scale. It comes from honesty. Small steps teach you to listen to your limits. Limits are not enemies, they are information. When you respect them, you act wisely. When you ignore them, you break. There is also courage in allowing effort to be small. It means letting go of image, letting go of the need to appear capable. You choose authenticity over performance. Honoring minimal effort also dissolves comparison. Small steps cannot be compared easily. They are personal. This privacy protects your path. There is also consistency born here. Small steps are easier to repeat. Repetition builds rhythm. Rhythm builds stability. Stability supports growth. The mind often waits for motivation to do more. Honoring small steps teaches you to act without waiting. Action creates momentum. Momentum creates capacity. Small steps also invite gratitude. When you notice them, you appreciate progress that once went unseen. Gratitude changes how effort feels. It becomes lighter. There is also learning in small steps. You receive feedback quickly. You adjust. You refine. Large steps often skip this refinement. Honoring small effort teaches you to stay present. You cannot hide behind grand plans. You engage with what is directly in front of you. Small steps also soften fear. Large changes feel threatening. Small changes feel manageable. This manageability keeps you moving. There is also faith here. Faith that something small matters. Faith that you matter even when you are not doing much. This faith heals self-worth. Small steps keep the door open. They prevent total withdrawal. Even when you feel lost, one small action keeps you engaged with life. There is also wisdom in recognizing seasons. Some seasons are for leaps, others are for inches. Honoring small steps respects seasonality. Small steps also train attention. You notice details. You refine intention. This attention deepens quality. There is also resilience built here. When you learn to value small effort, setbacks feel less catastrophic. You know you can begin again gently. Honoring minimal effort challenges perfectionism. Perfectionism demands all or nothing. Small steps live in between. They weaken extremes. There is also kindness here. You treat yourself as someone worth encouraging, not someone to punish into improvement. Small steps teach you that progress is not always visible, but visibility is not the measure of truth. There is also freedom in releasing the demand to do more than you can. You stop fighting yourself. Energy returns. Honoring small steps also prepares you for larger ones. Capacity grows naturally when it is respected. There is also a quiet reverence here. Each small action becomes an offering, not to outcome, but to presence. Small steps remind you that life is lived moment by moment. You cannot skip moments. You can only meet them. When you bow to small steps, you stop waiting for permission to begin. You begin where you are. This changes everything. Effort becomes accessible. Growth becomes humane. The path becomes walkable. And slowly, without forcing, small steps gather, not into something dramatic, but into something real. A life lived with care, one honest movement at a time. When you learn to bow to small steps, movement becomes gentle and honest. You stop forcing progress and begin to respect pace. But this shift introduces a new confusion. From the outside, your life may look quiet, less busy, less reactive, less visibly productive, and the mind begins to whisper a dangerous question. Have you become still, or have you stopped moving altogether? This is where many people turn against themselves without realizing it. Stillness and stagnation look similar on the surface. Both lack obvious motion. Both lack dramatic change. But internally, they are opposites. One is alive, the other is frozen. One is aware, the other is asleep. The difference between them is not action, it is attention. Stagnation happens when awareness shuts down. When life feels repetitive and the mind disengages, you go through motions without presence. You avoid reflection. You numb discomfort. Time passes, but nothing is digested, nothing is learned. Energy feels heavy and dull. Stillness, on the other hand, is full. It is receptive. It is alert. Even when the body is quiet and circumstances remain unchanged, awareness is active. You are noticing, feeling, understanding. This inner activity does not always produce visible results, but it produces clarity. The mind often confuses the two because it measures progress by speed. If you are not moving fast, it assumes you are stuck. But speed has nothing to do with awareness. You can move quickly and be completely stagnant. You can be externally active and internally asleep. Stillness slows things down enough for perception to sharpen. You notice thoughts instead of being carried by them. You notice habits instead of repeating them blindly. This noticing is movement at a deeper level. It changes direction even when pace is slow. Stagnation avoids discomfort. Stillness meets it. When something feels unresolved, stagnation distracts. Stillness stays. This staying allows integration. Integration is progress that does not announce itself. Awareness transforms immobility into progress because awareness metabolizes experience. Without awareness, experience piles up undigested. With awareness, even repetition teaches, even silence informs. In stillness, emotions are allowed to move internally. You feel what you feel without acting it out. This internal movement prevents stagnation. You are processing rather than suppressing. Stagnation feels flat. Stillness feels spacious. One contracts, the other opens. This difference is subtle but unmistakable once recognized. The mind often fears stillness because it cannot control it. Stillness removes the illusion of productivity. It reveals whether you are present or just busy. This exposure makes the mind uncomfortable. Stillness also interrupts identity. When you are not doing, you are not reinforcing who you think you are. This can feel like disappearing, but what actually disappears is unnecessary tension. Stagnation reinforces identity. You become attached to being stuck. You repeat the same stories. Stillness loosens identity. You are less defined by narrative and more by awareness. Awareness brings curiosity. Even in quiet moments, curiosity keeps the mind alive. You ask different questions. You notice new angles. Stagnation lacks curiosity. Everything feels already known. Stillness invites listening. You listen to your body, your breath, your subtle reactions. This listening reveals needs and limits. Stagnation ignores signals until they become problems. There is also an emotional difference. Stillness often carries a quiet peace beneath discomfort. Stagnation carries resentment, a sense of being trapped. These emotional tones matter. Stillness does not rush to escape boredom. It allows boredom to unfold. As you learned earlier, boredom opens depth. Stagnation uses boredom as proof that life is meaningless. Awareness also keeps values alive. Even when circumstances do not change, you act with intention. You choose restraint. You choose kindness. These choices are movement. Stagnation dulls values. You stop caring. You stop choosing. Life feels automatic. This dullness is not rest. It is withdrawal. Stillness allows rest without collapse. You rest while remaining engaged. This balance replenishes energy. Stagnation drains energy because it resists engagement. Awareness also prevents decay. Without awareness, habits harden. With awareness, habits remain flexible. Flexibility is a sign of life. Stillness sharpens sensitivity. You notice when something is no longer working. This noticing allows adjustment. Stagnation resists adjustment because it avoids noticing. There is also a temporal difference. Stillness feels timeless. You are present. Stagnation feels like time dragging. You are waiting for something to end. Awareness transforms immobility by keeping learning alive. Even without new input, insight deepens. You see patterns, you recognize causes. This recognition changes future responses. Stillness also supports ethical clarity. You pause before acting. This pause prevents harm. It allows wiser choices. Stagnation acts out of habit. The mind often demands visible proof of progress. Stillness offers internal proof. Less reactivity, more patience, more discernment. These are subtle but powerful. Stagnation often includes self-judgment. You label yourself as lazy or broken. Stillness includes self-observation without condemnation. This difference is crucial. Awareness also keeps compassion flowing. You remain sensitive to others. You are not shut down. Stagnation isolates. Stillness connects. Stillness is not passive. It is receptive. It receives experience fully. This reception changes you. Stagnation resists experience. It numbs, it avoids. This resistance creates suffering. Awareness transforms immobility into progress by allowing inner shifts. These shifts may not change circumstances immediately, but they change how you meet them. Stillness also prepares you for movement. When the time comes to act, clarity is present. Stagnation leads to impulsive or delayed action. The difference becomes clearer with practice. You learn to feel it. You trust the quality of awareness rather than the quantity of action. Stillness teaches you that progress is not always outward. Sometimes it is the removal of confusion, the softening of resistance, the easing of fear. Stagnation keeps confusion intact. Stillness dissolves it gradually. Awareness also brings honesty. You see when stillness turns into avoidance. This honesty prevents stagnation from hiding. Stillness includes choice. Even if you do not move, you are choosing to be present. This choice is active. Stagnation includes resignation. You feel you have no choice. This feeling is a sign to reawaken awareness. Awareness restores agency. You may not control outcomes, but you control attention. Attention directs growth. Stillness also honors cycles. There are times for rest, for incubation. Recognizing these times prevents unnecessary self-attack. Stagnation ignores cycles. It treats rest as failure. Stillness treats rest as part of movement. Awareness allows stillness to be fertile. Ideas mature. Emotions settle. Understanding integrates. Stagnation is infertile. Nothing grows because nothing is attended to. Over time, you begin to trust stillness. You recognize its texture, its quiet intelligence. You stop panicking when life slows. This trust changes how you move forward. You no longer equate worth with activity. You equate it with presence. The difference between stillness and stagnation is not visible to others. It is known internally. You feel alive or you feel shut down. Awareness keeps life alive even when it is quiet. It turns pauses into preparation, silence into learning. And when you learn to recognize this difference, you stop abandoning yourself during slow seasons. You remain present. You remain engaged. What once felt like doing nothing reveals itself as doing something essential. Becoming aware, becoming clear, becoming ready. Stillness, held with awareness, is not the absence of progress. It is progress refining itself. When you begin to trust stillness and recognize it as alive rather than empty, another habit of the mind comes into focus. A habit so familiar, it often goes unnoticed. The habit of rushing, the pressure to arrive, the quiet belief that if you move faster, you will finally understand. This belief feels harmless, even responsible, but it carries a hidden cost. Urgency does not bring awakening closer, it pushes it further away. Rushing is born from discomfort with the present moment. Something feels incomplete, unresolved, or unclear, and the mind wants relief. It imagines a future moment where everything will make sense, where peace will arrive, where effort will pay off. This imagined future becomes a destination, and the present becomes an obstacle to escape. Urgency fractures attention because it divides awareness. Part of you is here, but most of you is leaning forward. You are listening, but already planning the next step. You are practicing, but already measuring results. Attention becomes thin, and awakening, which depends on full presence, cannot take root in divided ground. The mind believes that speed equals progress, that faster understanding is better understanding. But understanding does not work like information. It is not accumulated, it is revealed. And revelation requires stillness, patience, and sustained attention. Urgency interrupts all three. When you rush, you skim experience instead of entering it. You move through moments looking for signs instead of staying with what is happening. This skimming creates the illusion of movement, but nothing integrates. Insights may appear briefly, but they do not settle. They remain concepts rather than lived truth. Urgency also tightens the nervous system. The body prepares for threat when it feels rushed. Muscles tense, breath shortens, perception narrows. In this state, awareness contracts. Awakening requires openness. Urgency produces the opposite. There is also fear beneath rushing, fear of wasting time, fear of falling behind, fear that if you do not hurry, something important will be missed. Buddhism teaches that this fear is rooted in misunderstanding. Nothing essential can be missed when you are present. Presence reveals what matters. Rushing creates a subtle violence toward experience. You are not allowing moments to unfold naturally. You are forcing meaning from them. This force distorts perception. You see what you expect instead of what is. Awakening is not an event you reach. It is a clarity that emerges when resistance drops. Urgency is resistance disguised as effort. It resists uncertainty. It resists not knowing. It resists waiting. This resistance delays realization. When urgency is present, practice becomes goal-driven. You meditate to feel calm. You reflect to gain insight. You act kindly to become better. These motivations are understandable, but they keep attention future-focused. The present becomes a means rather than the ground. Urgency also creates comparison. You measure your progress against others, against ideals, against imagined timelines. Comparison scatters attention. Instead of noticing your own experience, you monitor your position. Awakening requires intimacy, not ranking. Rushing fragments learning. You move on before lessons have settled. You collect ideas without digesting them. This creates mental clutter. Clutter clouds perception. There is also impatience with difficulty. When challenges arise, urgency wants them gone quickly, but difficulty often carries insight. Rushing past it skips understanding. The lesson returns later, often louder. Urgency feeds restlessness. Even when nothing is wrong, something feels off. This restlessness keeps the mind busy. Busy minds rarely see clearly. Buddhism emphasizes right effort, not excessive effort. Right effort is balanced. It is attentive without strain. Urgency strains. Strain narrows awareness. When you rush, you also rush others. You lose patience. You interrupt. You listen less deeply. This damages connection. Awakening is relational. It unfolds through how you meet life, including people. Urgency also distorts values. You begin to value outcomes over integrity, speed over care, efficiency over understanding. This distortion moves you away from wisdom. There is a paradox here. The more urgently you seek awakening, the more elusive it becomes. Because awakening is not something you acquire. It is something you stop blocking. Urgency blocks. Rushing creates mental noise, thoughts multiply, questions stack, analysis intensifies, silence recedes. As you learned earlier, silence is fertile ground. Urgency uproots it. There is also exhaustion that comes from rushing. The mind cannot sustain constant forward pressure. Fatigue dulls awareness. You may continue moving, but presence fades. Urgency makes you distrust the moment. You treat now as insufficient. This distrust erodes peace. Peace is not found later. It is found in how you relate to now. Awakening requires patience not because it takes time, but because patience allows depth. Without patience, depth cannot be entered. Everything remains surface. When urgency softens, something surprising happens. Time feels different. You are not waiting for the next moment. You are living this one. Attention gathers, experience deepens, slowness allows integration, feelings are felt fully, insights sink into behavior, choices become wiser. This integration is awakening in motion. Urgency also creates spiritual ambition. You want to be more aware, more evolved, more peaceful. This ambition reinforces the self you are trying to see through. Awakening loosens self-centered striving. Rushing postpones realization by keeping attention outside of itself. You are always reaching. Awakening happens when reaching stops. There is also fear of stillness beneath urgency. Stillness feels like nothing is happening, but stillness is where clarity arises. Urgency avoids stillness to avoid uncertainty. When you slow down, you notice subtleties, tiny shifts in thought, small emotional reactions. These subtleties are where insight lives. Urgency misses them. Urgency also undermines trust. You do not trust the process. You do not trust yourself to unfold naturally. This mistrust creates tension. Awakening is not fragile. It does not need to be chased. It reveals itself when conditions are right. Your role is to create those conditions, not force the result. Letting go of urgency feels risky at first. You worry you will lose momentum, but what you lose is agitation. What you gain is clarity. When urgency drops, effort becomes simpler. You do what is needed without drama. You stop overthinking. This simplicity supports realization. Urgency also keeps you focused on milestones. Awakening has no milestones. It is not marked by events. It is recognized by ease, clarity, and compassion. Rushing keeps you future-bound. Awakening is present-bound. This difference matters. As urgency fades, attention stabilizes. You are less scattered, less reactive, more available. This availability allows insight to emerge naturally. Awakening is not delayed by slowness, it is delayed by distraction. Urgency distracts. When you allow yourself to move at the pace of awareness rather than fear, realization draws closer without effort. It appears quietly, without fanfare. You may not even notice the moment it happens, because awakening is not fireworks. It is the absence of strain. The end of unnecessary struggle. Rushing delays awakening because it keeps you running past the very thing you are looking for. Slowing down allows you to stop long enough to see what has always been here. And when you see it, you realize there was never a race to win, only a moment to meet. When urgency loosens its grip and the need to rush begins to fade, you start to notice something unsettling. The world around you does not slow down with you. It keeps pushing. It keeps demanding speed, answers, output. And suddenly, your calm feels out of place. This is the moment when slowness stops being personal and starts becoming defiant. Not loud defiance, quiet resistance. The choice to move slowly in a world built on fear. Speed is rarely neutral. Beneath it lives anxiety, the fear of falling behind, the fear of being left out. The fear that if you stop, everything will collapse. Modern life runs on this fear. It keeps people busy enough to never feel what is driving them. Slow living exposes this engine, and that exposure is uncomfortable. Choosing slowness is not laziness. It is discernment. It is recognizing that constant acceleration does not equal safety. In fact, it often hides insecurity. When everything must be fast, there is no time to feel uncertainty. Slowness brings uncertainty to the surface. That is why it feels threatening. Fear thrives on speed because speed prevents reflection. When you are rushing, you do not ask why. You simply react. This reaction feels like control, but it is actually avoidance. Slow living interrupts this cycle. It creates space. And in that space, fear becomes visible. This visibility is the first act of rebellion. You stop letting fear decide your pace. You begin to choose patience not because it is comfortable, but because it is honest. Honesty disrupts systems built on panic. Slow living asks different questions, not how fast can this be done, but why does it need to be done at all? Not what is next, but what is here. These questions weaken fear's authority. Fear wants urgency. Clarity wants time. There is social pressure to rush. Messages, deadlines, comparisons, constant updates. Slowing down can feel like opting out of relevance, but relevance built on anxiety is fragile. Slow living builds relevance rooted in presence. Presence lasts longer. Choosing patience is not passive. It requires courage. You are choosing to feel what speed helps you avoid: restlessness, doubt, uncertainty. These feelings do not disappear when ignored, they accumulate. Slow living allows them to move through you instead of running the show. Fear tells you that slowing down will cost you opportunities. Sometimes it does. But fear does not tell you what speed costs. Speed costs depth. Speed costs connection. Speed costs the ability to listen to yourself. Slow living restores relationship with the body. The body does not rush naturally. It responds to rhythm. When you slow down, signals become clearer: hunger, fatigue, emotion. This clarity improves decisions. Fear prefers disconnection from the body because disconnection makes control easier. Patience in a culture addicted to speed feels rebellious because it refuses the premise that everything is urgent. You begin to see how many emergencies are manufactured, how much stress is unnecessary. This seeing changes behavior. Slow living also challenges productivity myths. You realize that being busy is not the same as being effective. Many rushed actions create more work later. Slowness allows precision. Precision reduces waste. Fear wants guarantees. Speed feels like chasing guarantees. Slow living accepts uncertainty. This acceptance reduces anxiety. Anxiety feeds on the illusion that certainty is possible. Choosing patience also changes how you relate to others. You listen more. You interrupt less. You allow pauses. These pauses deepen connection. Fear-driven speed fractures relationships. Slowness repairs them. There is also a reclaiming of time. Slow living gives time back to you. Not more hours, but more presence within hours. Moments feel fuller. This fullness counters the scarcity mindset that fear relies on. Slow living is a rebellion because it refuses constant comparison. Speed amplifies comparison. Who is ahead? Who is faster? Who is winning? Slowness dissolves this race. You stop measuring yourself against others' pace. Fear thrives on the belief that you are late, late to success, late to clarity, late to life. Slow living questions this belief. You ask, late according to whom? This questioning weakens fear. Choosing patience also reshapes ambition. Ambition driven by fear feels desperate. Ambition guided by slowness feels intentional. You choose goals that align with values rather than panic. Slow living makes room for discernment. You notice which demands are real and which are noise. This discernment prevents overwhelm. There is also a political aspect to slowness. Systems profit from rushed people. Rushed people consume more. They question less. Slowing down restores agency. Agency threatens fear-based systems. Fear convinces you that slowing down is irresponsible, but responsibility requires awareness. Awareness requires time. Slowness supports responsibility rather than undermines it. Slow living also changes how you experience success. Success stops being about speed and starts being about sustainability. Can this be lived with? Can this be maintained? Fear ignores sustainability. Slowness honors it. Patience allows integration. Lessons settle. Emotions process. Wisdom matures. Without integration, growth becomes chaotic. Slow living teaches you to say no without guilt. You recognize limits. Respecting limits is an act of self-trust. Fear demands overextension. Slowness restores boundaries. There is also relief here. When you stop rushing, the constant pressure eases. You breathe deeper. You sleep better. These changes are not small. They are foundational. Fear also fuels multitasking. Doing many things at once creates the illusion of efficiency. Slow living favors single attention. Single attention improves quality. Quality reduces rework. Choosing slowness does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means engaging deliberately. You choose when to move fast and when to pause. Fear removes choice. Slowness restores it. Slow living also deepens gratitude. When you are not rushing, you notice what is already present. Gratitude reduces fear by shifting attention from lack to sufficiency. There is also a spiritual dimension. Fear keeps attention external. Slowness turns attention inward. This inward turn reveals values. Values guide action more reliably than fear. Slow living is not about doing less. It is about doing what matters. Fear inflates importance. Slowness clarifies it. Choosing patience also protects mental health. Constant urgency keeps the nervous system activated. Slowness allows regulation. Regulation supports clarity. Fear-driven speed avoids stillness. Stillness reveals vulnerability. Slow living allows vulnerability. Vulnerability fosters authenticity. There is also resistance from others. People may misunderstand your pace. They may project their fear onto you. Slow living requires confidence to remain steady without approval. Slow living also changes your relationship with mistakes. You have time to notice them early. You adjust gently. Speed often turns small errors into big ones. Choosing patience helps you distinguish between pressure and purpose. Pressure demands immediate action. Purpose invites considered response. Slow living creates space for meaning. Meaning cannot be rushed. It unfolds through engagement. Fear wants shortcuts. Slowness respects process. Respecting process leads to deeper satisfaction. There is also joy in slowness. Not excitement, but contentment. Contentment undermines fear's narrative that you are always lacking. Slow living teaches you that safety does not come from speed. It comes from presence. Presence allows wise response. Choosing patience in an anxious culture is not easy. It requires repeated choice. Each time you slow down, you resist fear's script. Over time, this resistance becomes natural. You stop feeling rebellious. You feel grounded. Slow living becomes your default, not as avoidance, but as alignment. You move when movement is true. You pause when pause is needed. Fear loses its grip not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. And in this quieter rhythm, life becomes less about keeping up and more about being here. Slowness reveals that peace was never hiding in the future. It was waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice it. When slowness becomes a way of living rather than a reaction, another shift quietly happens. The excitement that once carried you forward begins to fade. The sense of meaning that once felt obvious grows distant. You are no longer rushing, but you are also no longer inspired. This is where many people assume the path has ended. In truth, this is where it finally becomes real. Motivation is emotional energy. It rises when something feels new, hopeful, or rewarding. It fades when effort becomes ordinary. This fading is not a problem. It is a signal. The signal that you are no longer being carried by feeling alone. The mind often panics here because it was taught that desire must come before action. Buddhism teaches the opposite. At a certain point, action comes before desire. When motivation disappears, discipline steps forward. Not discipline as punishment or force, but discipline as relationship. A steady commitment to showing up regardless of mood. This commitment is not dramatic. It does not feel powerful. It feels plain. And that plainness is exactly why it works. Inspiration depends on conditions. Discipline depends on values. When conditions change, inspiration leaves. When values are clear, discipline remains. Spiritual maturity begins when values guide action more than feelings do. There is disappointment when motivation fades. You may grieve the loss of excitement. You may wonder if something is wrong with you. This grief is natural. It marks the end of a phase where effort was fueled by emotion. What replaces it is quieter but stronger. Discipline without motivation feels uncomfortable because it removes emotional reward. You do not feel uplifted for doing the right thing. You simply do it. This reveals sincerity. Are you walking this path for how it makes you feel, or because it reflects who you are becoming? Trusting the path when motivation disappears requires patience. You must continue without internal applause. The mind may complain. It may say this is pointless. But discipline does not argue. It acts gently, repeatedly. There is a misconception that discipline is rigid. In reality, true discipline is adaptive. It listens to limits. It adjusts pace. It does not abandon the path, but it does change how it walks. When motivation is gone, discipline simplifies practice. You stop trying to do everything. You focus on what is essential. This simplicity protects against burnout. Discipline also builds trust in yourself. Each time you show up without wanting to, you prove that your commitment is deeper than mood. This trust is grounding. You no longer fear emotional fluctuation. There is also freedom here. Motivation can be intoxicating, but it is unstable. Discipline frees you from dependence on inner weather. You are no longer controlled by how you feel. Spiritual maturity involves accepting dryness, accepting repetition, accepting effort without reward. These acceptances deepen presence. You stop chasing experience and start embodying values. Discipline also teaches humility. You stop assuming that progress should feel good. You accept that growth can be quiet, even dull. This humility protects against spiritual ego. When inspiration fades, many people quit because they believe something essential is missing. Buddhism teaches that what is missing is illusion. Illusion, that feeling, determines meaning. Discipline reveals meaning through consistency. There is also clarity here. Without motivation clouding perception, you see your resistance clearly. You notice excuses, you notice avoidance. This noticing allows honest adjustment. Discipline without motivation also deepens compassion. You understand how hard it is to continue when nothing feels rewarding. This understanding softens judgment toward others. There is also endurance built here, not endurance of suffering, but endurance of ordinariness. Most of life is ordinary. Learning to live well within it is maturity. Trusting the path when motivation disappears requires letting go of the idea that growth should feel inspiring. Growth often feels repetitive. Discipline allows repetition to continue. Discipline also protects rhythm. You maintain a cadence. This rhythm stabilizes the nervous system. Stability supports insight. When motivation is gone, discipline prevents regression. You do not slide backwards simply because you feel flat. This steadiness preserves progress. There is also wisdom here. You learn the difference between desire and direction. Desire fluctuates. Direction remains. Discipline teaches you to act from intention rather than impulse. This shift changes how decisions are made. You become less reactive. Trusting the path without motivation also changes your relationship with time. You stop waiting for feeling to return. You live now. There is also peace here. Not excitement, but quiet steadiness. You are no longer negotiating with yourself constantly. Discipline does not eliminate doubt. It coexists with it. You act while unsure. This is maturity. When motivation disappears, discipline reveals whether the path is integrated into your life or dependent on special states. Integration lasts. There is also dignity in continuing without inspiration. You are not performing spirituality. You are living it. Discipline replaces inspiration not because inspiration is bad, but because inspiration is temporary. Discipline sustains what inspiration begins. Spiritual maturity is not feeling enlightened. It is behaving with care when you feel nothing special at all. There is also resilience here. You are less shaken by emotional lows. You know they do not define direction. Trusting the path when motivation disappears teaches you that meaning is not always felt. Sometimes it is enacted. Discipline also refines intention. You stop doing things for how they make you feel. You do them because they align with what matters. This alignment becomes its own reward, quiet, stable, reliable. Over time, motivation may return, or it may not. But your commitment no longer depends on it. You have learned to walk without emotional fuel, to continue without excitement, to trust without reassurance. This is not a loss. It is graduation. The path becomes less dramatic and more honest, less about experience and more about embodiment. And in this embodiment, something subtle happens. You stop asking whether you are motivated enough. You simply continue, and that continuation, steady and unremarkable, is what spiritual maturity actually looks like. When discipline replaces inspiration and you continue without emotional fuel, a new temptation quietly appears. the temptation to push harder, to speed things up, to demand results from yourself now that you are committed. This pressure often disguises itself as dedication, but beneath it lives something sharper, a subtle aggression toward your own becoming. And this aggression, though socially praised, quietly works against transformation. Forcing change begins with impatience toward what is. You see where you are and decide it is not acceptable, not ready, not enough. You tell yourself you must be better, calmer, wiser, healed, quickly. This demand feels productive, but it carries a hidden message. That who you are now is a problem. Violence does not always look like harm. Sometimes it looks like relentless improvement, constant self-correction, the refusal to rest until something inside you changes. This kind of pressure creates tension, not growth. Growth responds to safety, not threat. When change is forced, resistance naturally rises. This resistance is not stubbornness, it is protection. Parts of you push back because they sense danger, they sense rejection. When growth feels like an attack, the system closes. Aggression toward growth fractures trust within yourself. You begin to treat your inner world as an enemy territory that must be conquered. This internal conflict drains energy. Instead of transformation, you get exhaustion. Forcing change also narrows awareness. When you are focused on fixing, you stop listening. You overlook important information. Emotions are labeled obstacles instead of messages. This blindness delays insight. There is also fear beneath forced change. Fear that if you do not push, nothing will happen. Fear that patience is laziness. Fear that softness equals failure. Buddhism teaches that fear-driven effort lacks wisdom. It acts without understanding. When change is forced, the mind uses harsh language. Should, must, why can't you? This language creates shame. Shame constricts attention. Constricted attention cannot learn. Transformation requires curiosity. Aggression kills curiosity. You are too busy correcting to understand. Too busy judging to feel. Forcing change also disrupts natural timing. Development has rhythms. Some parts need rest, others need repetition. Pressure ignores rhythm. It applies the same force everywhere. This uniform pressure breaks delicate processes. There is a difference between commitment and coercion. Commitment listens, coercion commands. When you coerce yourself, parts of you comply briefly, then rebel. This cycle creates instability. Aggression toward growth also feeds perfectionism. Nothing is ever enough. Progress is discounted. This dissatisfaction keeps you chasing instead of integrating. Forcing change often produces superficial results. You may appear improved, more controlled, more disciplined, but underlying patterns remain untouched. They resurface later, often stronger. There is also a loss of compassion here. When you are harsh with yourself, you become harsh with others. You expect rapid change from them too. This damages connection. Growth forced through pressure lacks resilience. It depends on continued force. When force drops, progress collapses. Sustainable transformation requires internal agreement, not domination. Forcing change also disconnects you from your body. You override signals. You push through fatigue. You ignore discomfort. This disconnection leads to imbalance. Buddhist practice emphasizes right effort. Right effort is gentle. It is firm without being violent. It respects limits. It responds to conditions. Aggression toward growth creates inner fragmentation. Some parts of you want change. Others want safety. Instead of dialogue, you impose authority. This silences important voices. When parts are silenced, they do not disappear. They go underground. They influence behavior indirectly. This creates confusion. Forcing change also undermines trust in process. You do not believe that growth will happen unless you control it. This mistrust creates constant tension. There is also grief hidden here, grief for how long things are taking, grief for how imperfect you feel. Aggression often masks this grief, softening reveals it. Transformation requires allowing grief. Forcing skips grief, skipped grief returns as resistance. Aggressive self-improvement treats symptoms, not causes. It changes behavior without addressing meaning. This leads to relapse. Forcing change also creates fear of failure. If effort is harsh, mistakes feel dangerous. Fear reduces experimentation. Without experimentation, learning stops. There is also spiritual bypassing here. You try to rise above unresolved issues instead of meeting them. This bypass delays healing. Aggression toward growth often comes from comparing yourself to an ideal. This ideal is usually unrealistic. Chasing it creates constant dissatisfaction. Buddhism teaches that clinging to ideals creates suffering. Forcing change is clinging in action. Transformation unfolds through relationship. Relationship with yourself, with experience. Relationship requires respect. Aggression breaks respect. When you slow down and listen, you notice that some parts resist change because they need understanding, not correction. Listening allows this understanding. Gentle change invites cooperation. When parts feel seen, they soften. This softening allows movement. Forcing change also ignores the wisdom of gradual unfolding. Some insights must ripen. Pressure harvests them too early. There is also exhaustion that comes from constant self-pressure. Exhaustion dulls awareness. Dull awareness cannot transform. Aggression toward growth often confuses intensity with sincerity. Intensity looks impressive, sincerity looks ordinary, but sincerity lasts. Transformation is not a war. There is nothing to defeat. There is only understanding to deepen. When you stop forcing, you create space. In this space, awareness returns. Awareness reveals next steps naturally. Gentle effort builds trust. Trust allows risk. Risk allows change. Forcing creates compliance. Allowing creates participation. Participation is transformative. There is also forgiveness required. Forgiveness for slowness. Forgiveness for imperfection. Forgiveness for being human. Aggression toward growth refuses forgiveness. It demands constant improvement. This demand is unsustainable. Transformation happens when resistance is met with curiosity instead of force. Curiosity opens, force closes. There is also a quiet confidence that grows when you stop pushing. You trust that change will come through engagement, not attack. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that a clenched fist cannot receive. Aggression clenches. Gentleness opens. When you release the urge to force, effort becomes cleaner. You do what is needed without violence. Change that emerges from gentleness integrates fully. It does not need constant maintenance. Aggressive change creates tension. Integrated change creates ease. The path does not respond to force, it responds to presence. When you allow growth rather than impose it, resistance dissolves naturally. What was blocked begins to move. Transformation then feels less like becoming someone else and more like returning to yourself. And in that return, you realize that nothing ever needed to be forced. It needed to be understood. When the urge to force change softens and you stop treating growth like a battle, another belief quietly comes into question. The belief that struggle means something went wrong. That difficulty is a sign of failure. That if the path were correct, it would be cleaner, easier, lighter. This belief is deeply rooted and it creates unnecessary shame. Buddhism offers a different image. Growth does not happen despite the mud. It happens because of it. Struggle is often treated as a mistake, something to escape, something to fix quickly. When life becomes heavy, the mind asks what you did wrong, why this happened, why it is taking so long. This questioning assumes that ease is the natural state and difficulty is an interruption. But many of the most meaningful transformations arise precisely within conditions that are uncomfortable. The lotus does not apologize for the mud, because the mud is not a detour. It is the environment that makes blooming possible. Without the density, the pressure, the darkness, there is no structure for growth. In the same way, human struggle provides resistance that shapes depth, strength, and understanding. When you frame struggle as a flaw, you turn against your own experience. You try to rise above it too quickly. You disown parts of your journey. This rejection creates fragmentation. You split your life into acceptable and unacceptable chapters. Buddhism invites integration instead. Struggle provides context. It gives meaning to qualities that could not develop otherwise. Patience only forms when waiting is required. Compassion deepens when pain is known. Clarity sharpens when confusion has been lived. These qualities are not abstract ideas, they are responses shaped by experience. There is a tendency to compare your inner life to imagined ideals. You think you should be calmer by now, more healed, more stable. When reality does not match this image, shame appears. Shame says the mud is your fault. Buddhism dissolves this shame by reminding you that difficulty is not a personal defect. It is part of the terrain. Struggle also slows you down. And as you have learned, slowness reveals things speed hides. Without struggle, many truths remain superficial. Comfort does not challenge assumptions. Difficulty does. The mud is where roots form. Roots are invisible. They do not look impressive, but they determine how well something stands. Struggle strengthens these unseen structures. When growth is tested early, it becomes resilient later. Reframing struggle also changes how you relate to others. When you stop seeing your own difficulties as failures, you stop seeing others' difficulties as weaknesses. Judgment softens. Empathy grows. You recognize shared humanity instead of ranking experiences. Struggle also teaches honesty. When things are hard, pretending becomes exhausting. Masks fall away. You meet yourself more directly. This meeting can be uncomfortable, but it is authentic. Authenticity is the ground of wisdom. There is also humility learned through struggle. You realize how little control you have. This humility reduces arrogance. It makes you more open to learning. Open minds grow. Many people try to leap over struggle using positivity, productivity, or spirituality. But bypassing mud does not remove it. It only delays encounter. Delayed encounters are often more painful. Struggle asks you to stay, to feel, to listen. These are not passive acts. They require courage. Courage not to escape discomfort prematurely. When you stop apologizing for your mud, you stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying why things are hard. You accept the season you are in. Acceptance brings relief. Struggle also clarifies values. When things are easy, values remain theoretical. When things are hard, you see what truly matters. Choices become clearer. The mud also protects growth. Fragile beginnings cannot survive exposure. Difficulty shields development from premature display. This protection allows authenticity to form. There is also creativity born from struggle. When familiar paths are blocked, new ways emerge. Necessity sharpens ingenuity. Without constraint, creativity often remains shallow. Struggle teaches endurance, not endurance as suffering, but endurance as continuity. You learn how to keep going without losing yourself. This skill is essential for long-term growth. Reframing struggle also changes how you relate to your past. Instead of regretting difficult chapters, you begin to understand them. Understanding replaces resentment. The mud holds nutrients. Pain carries information. When you extract meaning rather than flee discomfort, insight grows. Insight is nourishment. Struggle also reveals attachment. You see what you are clinging to when it is threatened. This seeing allows release. Release brings freedom. When you accept struggle as context, you stop rushing healing. You respect timing. Healing unfolds organically when not forced. There is also a shift in self-talk. You stop asking why me and start asking what is being shaped here. This question opens rather than closes. Struggle makes compassion credible. Without lived difficulty, compassion remains an idea. With difficulty, it becomes embodied. The lotus does not bloom by rejecting the mud, it uses it. Similarly, you do not grow by erasing struggle, you grow by relating to it wisely. Reframing struggle reduces fear of future difficulty. You trust that if hardship arises, it will shape rather than destroy you. This trust reduces anxiety. There is also dignity in struggle, not romanticizing pain but honoring effort within it. You acknowledge your resilience without glorifying suffering. Struggle teaches patience with imperfection. You realize that growth is uneven. This patience softens self-criticism. When struggle is seen as context, not flaw, identity shifts. You are not broken, you are becoming. This reframing also changes success. Success is no longer absence of struggle, it is presence within it. The mud also grounds you. It keeps you connected to reality. Idealized paths often lead to disillusionment. Real paths include difficulty. Struggle reminds you that wisdom is lived, not imagined. It is earned through engagement. When you stop apologizing for your mud, you stop hiding. You bring your whole self forward. This wholeness is powerful. There is also relief here. You no longer carry the extra burden of shame. Difficulty is enough without judgment added. Reframing struggle allows gratitude to emerge. Not gratitude for pain, but gratitude for what pain has revealed. The lotus blooms not in spite of where it grew, but because of it. It does not reject its origin, it integrates it. In the same way, your clarity, your compassion, your depth are not accidents. They are shaped by where you have been. When you understand this, the path changes tone. It becomes less about correcting mistakes and more about honoring process. Struggle stops being evidence against you. It becomes evidence of engagement. And in that understanding, you stand taller, not because the mud is gone, but because you no longer believe it disqualifies you. You do not apologize for the conditions that shaped you. You grow from them. And like the lotus, you rise without denying where your roots are planted. When you stop apologizing for the mud and accept struggle as part of the terrain, another quiet discomfort often remains. Even with acceptance, even with patience, even with trust. There is still confusion. Direction is not clear. Answers do not arrive. You may be doing everything right and still feel lost. This is the moment where many people turn back, not because the path is wrong, but because they believe certainty should come before movement. Feeling lost is usually treated as a warning sign, as proof that something is off course. The mind believes that correct direction should feel confident, clear, and reassuring. But in lived experience, this is rarely true. Often the most honest movement forward happens while clarity lags behind. Confusion does not mean you are failing. It means the old maps no longer work, and new ones have not yet formed. This in-between state is uncomfortable because it removes familiar reference points. You cannot rely on past identities. You cannot see far ahead. All you have is the next step. Walking forward while feeling lost requires a different kind of trust. Not trust in understanding, but trust in orientation. You may not know where you are going, but you know what no longer aligns. You know what feels false. This knowing is enough to keep moving. The mind resists this because it prefers explanation over experience. It wants to label the path, name the destination, justify the effort. Confusion offers none of this. It asks you to proceed without intellectual reassurance. This feels risky, but it is often necessary. Many people wait for clarity before acting. They believe movement should follow understanding, but often understanding follows movement. As you walk, perspective shifts. As perspective shifts, clarity emerges. Waiting for certainty can mean waiting forever. Confusion is not absence of direction, it is absence of confirmation. You are moving, but you are not being applauded by your own mind. This lack of feedback creates anxiety. Buddhism teaches that anxiety is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes it is a signal that you are learning to walk without crutches. Walking while lost also humbles the ego. The ego wants to know. It wants to appear competent. Confusion strips that away. You are forced to admit uncertainty. This admission softens rigidity. Softness allows learning. There is also honesty here. You are no longer pretending to understand more than you do. You engage with life as it is, not as you wish it to be. This honesty aligns you with reality. Feeling lost often arises when deeper values are forming. Old motivations fall away. New ones are not yet articulate. You feel disoriented because your internal compass is recalibrating. This recalibration cannot be rushed. Walking forward in this state teaches discernment. You learn to differentiate between confusion that signals danger and confusion that signals growth. The former feels panicked and contracted. The latter feels uncertain but alive. Confusion can coexist with correct direction because direction is not always cognitive. Sometimes it is ethical, sometimes it is relational, sometimes it is simply the choice to continue with integrity rather than retreat into what is familiar. There is also patience learned here. You stop demanding immediate understanding. You allow insight to arrive on its own schedule. This patience reduces inner pressure. Walking while lost also strengthens resilience. You learn that not knowing does not paralyze you. You can continue anyway. This ability becomes invaluable during future uncertainty. The mind often equates being lost with being wrong, but many transformative journeys begin with disorientation. When familiar landmarks disappear, you are forced to rely on awareness rather than habit. Confusion also creates openness. Without fixed ideas, you are receptive. You notice unexpected signs. You listen more deeply. This receptivity invites guidance that certainty would block. Walking forward without clarity also changes how you relate to fear. Fear loses its authority to stop you. You learn to carry fear while moving gently. This skill builds confidence. There is also freedom here. You are no longer bound by rigid plans. You respond to what arises. This responsiveness keeps you aligned with reality. Confusion teaches you to value direction over destination. You focus on the quality of your steps rather than the end point. This focus improves how you walk. Walking while lost also reveals how much of life is navigated this way. Few things are fully understood in advance. Accepting this reduces frustration. There is also compassion for yourself here. You stop demanding clarity as a prerequisite for worth. You allow yourself to be human. Confusion often arises when you are leaving something behind. Old identities dissolve before new ones form. This dissolution feels like being lost, but it is also being freed. Walking forward while lost requires attention to small signals. What feels slightly more honest? What feels slightly less heavy? These subtle cues guide you. There is also trust in process. You believe that meaning will emerge through engagement rather than analysis alone. This belief supports movement. Confusion can coexist with correct direction because direction is often felt before it is understood. You sense alignment even when you cannot explain it. The mind resists this because it prefers certainty, but certainty can be misleading. Many wrong paths feel certain, many right paths feel confusing. Walking forward while lost also dissolves perfectionism. You stop waiting to feel ready. You begin where you are. This beginning creates momentum. There is also humility here. You accept that you are learning. Learning requires uncertainty. Without uncertainty, growth stagnates. Confusion invites questions, not questions demanding answers, but questions that open awareness. These questions deepen insight. Walking without clarity also trains presence. You cannot rely on autopilot. You must pay attention. This attention sharpens perception. There is also courage required. You move without guarantees. This courage is quiet but powerful. Confusion also reduces attachment to outcome. You are less invested in how things turn out because you cannot predict them. This reduces anxiety. Walking forward while feeling lost teaches you that direction is not always visible. Sometimes it is only felt after distance is traveled. Over time, you may look back and realize that what felt like wandering was actually learning terrain. You were gathering experience, not wasting time. Confusion also builds tolerance for ambiguity. Life is ambiguous. Resisting this creates suffering. Accepting it creates ease. Walking while lost allows you to meet life freshly. Without assumptions, you see what is actually there. This seeing is valuable. There is also faith here. Not faith that you know where you are going, but faith that you can respond wisely as you go. Confusion does not disqualify you from progress. It often accompanies it. When you stop treating being lost as failure, you stop panicking. You move more gently. This gentleness keeps you aligned. Walking forward while lost also teaches surrender. You release the need to control understanding. You allow insight to unfold. There is also strength here. You are not waiting for certainty to live. You are living now. Confusion becomes less threatening over time. You recognize it as a companion on the path rather than an enemy. Eventually, clarity does emerge, not all at once, gradually, often quietly. And when it does, you realize it could not have arrived sooner. It needed the walking, it needed the uncertainty, it needed the humility. You were not lost in the way you feared. You were learning how to move without a map, and that learning becomes one of your greatest strengths. When you learn to walk forward even while feeling lost, another space quietly reveals itself, a space that feels suspended. You have acted, you have chosen, you have planted something, but nothing has answered yet. No results, no confirmation, just waiting. This pause is uncomfortable because it does not belong to effort or outcome. It belongs to neither past nor future. And yet, this is where much of life actually happens. There is a deep unease in the gap between cause and effect. You do something meaningful and expect a response. When none comes, the mind fills the silence with doubt. Did it work? Did it matter? Did I choose wrong? This questioning is natural, but it often turns the pause into suffering. Buddhism invites a different relationship with this space. It calls it sacred. The pause exists because life does not respond instantly. Causes move through layers of conditions before effects appear. These layers are complex and mostly invisible. The mind struggles with invisibility. It wants feedback. It wants reassurance. When reassurance is delayed, anxiety grows. The sacred pause asks you to stay without reaching forward, to remain present without demanding resolution. This is difficult because the mind believes peace should arrive after results, not before them. But waiting for outcomes to feel settled keeps you restless. Living peacefully in the gap requires trust not in results, but in process. You trust that causes are moving even when effects are silent. This trust is quiet. It does not eliminate uncertainty. It allows uncertainty to exist without panic. The pause reveals how attached you are to outcome. When nothing happens, attachment becomes obvious. You feel tension, impatience, fear. This is not failure, it is information. The pause shows you where clinging lives. There is also vulnerability here. Without outcome, identity feels unstable. You are no longer someone who succeeded or failed. You are someone who acted and is now waiting. This undefined state is uncomfortable, but it is also freeing. You are not yet boxed into a story. The gap between cause and effect is where integration happens. Actions need time to settle into the system. Lessons need time to mature. Without pause, nothing integrates. Everything remains superficial. The mind often treats the pause as wasted time. But pause is not absence, it is incubation. Just as seeds rest underground before sprouting, intentions rest before manifesting. Living peacefully in this gap requires patience that is active, not passive. Active patience means staying engaged with life without constantly checking for results. You continue caring, you continue showing up, you simply stop demanding immediate answers. The pause also teaches restraint. You resist the urge to interfere prematurely. You do not dig up the seed to see if it is growing. This restraint protects fragile beginnings. There is also humility learned here. You accept that you cannot control timing. This humility softens frustration. It aligns you with reality rather than fighting it. The sacred pause challenges the belief that worth is tied to outcome. You learn to value intention and effort without confirmation. This shifts self-worth inward. Waiting without anxiety requires grounding attention in the present. You focus on what can be done now rather than what should happen later. This presence reduces mental agitation. The pause also exposes how often you rush to conclusions. When nothing happens, the mind invents explanations, usually negative. Learning to pause these narratives prevents unnecessary suffering. There is also compassion developed here. You recognize that others are also living in gaps, waiting for healing, for recognition, for change. This recognition softens judgment. The gap between cause and effect also teaches impermanence. Even when effects arrive, they will pass. Knowing this reduces attachment. You appreciate without clinging. Living peacefully in the pause requires befriending uncertainty. You stop treating not knowing as a problem. You accept it as part of life's rhythm. The pause also reveals faith in a new form. Not faith that things will work out, but faith that you can remain present regardless of outcome. There is also a slowing of inner tempo. You stop scanning the future. You settle into now. This settling brings calm. The sacred pause allows reflection. You review intention, you adjust attitude, you refine understanding. This reflection improves future action. When outcomes are delayed, you learn to differentiate between effort and attachment. You act fully, then release. This balance prevents burnout. The pause also creates space for gratitude. You notice what is already here instead of fixating on what has not arrived. Living peacefully in the gap teaches emotional regulation. You experience anticipation without being consumed by it. This regulation supports mental health. The pause also strengthens discipline. You continue without reward. This continuation deepens commitment. There is also freedom here. You are no longer enslaved to outcome timelines. You live more fully now. The gap teaches you that silence does not mean nothing is happening. Much is happening beneath awareness. Trust grows here. Living in the pause also trains acceptance. You accept that life unfolds at its own pace. This acceptance reduces resistance. The sacred pause is where wisdom matures. Without rushing to conclusion, understanding deepens. You also learn to rest, not collapse, but rest within uncertainty. This rest replenishes energy. The pause challenges productivity culture. It reminds you that not everything can be optimized. Some things must ripen. There is also joy discovered here. Quiet joy. The joy of being alive without needing confirmation. Living peacefully in the gap reduces fear of future waiting. You know you can survive it. The pause also sharpens discernment. You notice which impulses are driven by anxiety and which by clarity. You learn to distinguish between necessary action and compulsive action. This distinction improves life quality. The sacred pause teaches reverence for timing. You respect natural processes. This respect brings harmony. When outcomes finally arrive, you meet them differently, less grasping, more gratitude, more balance. And when outcomes do not arrive as expected, you are not destroyed. You have learned to live fully, even without resolution. The gap becomes familiar. It no longer frightens you. It becomes a place of quiet strength. You stop rushing through life waiting for things to happen. You live where you are. The sacred pause becomes a teacher. It shows you how much suffering comes from impatience. Living peacefully in this space transforms waiting into living. You realize that much of life is lived between action and result. Learning to inhabit this space is learning how to live at all. The pause is not empty. It is full of becoming. And when you stop trying to escape it, you discover that peace was never waiting on the other side of results. It was available here all along, in the space where you learned to trust without proof. What you've heard is not a lesson about waiting. It is a reminder that movement does not need speed to be real. You've seen how trust grows in silence, how effort continues without witnesses, how confusion can walk beside clarity, how patience protects wisdom, and how growth unfolds even when nothing seems to change. You've learned that slowness is not failure, that struggle is not a flaw, and that stillness can carry more progress than urgency ever could. What moves slowly is still moving forward because it is honest, because it is rooted, because it is not trying to escape the moment it is in. Trust is not loud. It does not rush. It stays. If something in this journey spoke to you, leave a comment with the words, "I am still moving forward," not for anyone else, just as a quiet marker that you heard what you needed to hear today. And if you want more teachings like this, calm, grounded, and meant to stay with you long after the video ends, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Move at your pace, stay with the path. And remember, even now, even here, you are still moving forward.